Reborn as the Viking Pirate King. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction, so don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 301 Francis in Action, 1. The next morning, in Cheshire, Northumbria. Outside Lindisfarne Abbey, a dense forest covering nearly 10 square kilometers lay. This forest was known as Queen Alice's Land, in honor of Alice Durand, Queen of Eller a century ago. This forest was a popular tourist destination. However, as the Northumbrian aristocracy shifted their hobbies from hunting to Eastern land opera, Queen Alice's Land remained untouched year-round, allowing trees and wild animals to grow unchecked. Frequent sightings of wolves and wild bears made the area too dangerous, even hunters hesitated. As the sun rose, Archbishop Francis pushed aside the thick pine needles covering the cave entrance. Heedless of the cold dew dripping down his cheeks, he poked his head out and cautiously surveyed his surroundings. After confirming that no one was around, the old archbishop, who had lost 20 pounds in a month, nimbly climbed the tree and pulled out a telescope. From the top of the tree, he could see the spire of Lindisfarne Abbey, and beneath it, 6,000 Vikings encamped. The old dean shook his head helplessly. It was easy to guess that the Northumbrian royal family hadn't sent any troops to defend against the saber-toothed mercenaries. The palace was empty, without a single soldier or general. When the saber-toothed mercenaries landed, Yorkshire had already been purged. Furthermore, Eller I had likely fallen into Loki's hands. Leaderless, plagued by internal and external troubles, Northumbria's governing system was completely paralyzed. Climbing down the tree, he returned to the cave. Hidden within the vast, empty caverns lay the 5,000 English survivors from the 5 towns and 17 villages of Cheshire. Dean Francis had survived a winter in the perilous Storm's End, a skill that proved him no fool. A month ago, after he released the White Dove to contact the Viking king through the fire priest Abijah, he knew that a terrible war would inevitably engulf the 7 kingdoms. From that moment on, he immediately set about selling off everything within Lindisfarne Abbey, its buildings, statues, and lands, and used all the proceeds to purchase food. Then, using his eloquence, a mixture of persuasion and threats, the old abbot drove all the civilians of Cheshire County away from their homes, hiding in the caves of the Mirkwood Forest. Abbot Francis had always been a pervert. In his youth, pursuing amorous desires, he once lured a fallen woman into the wilds. They ended up kissing and tumbling into a cave, nearly being eaten by a wild bear. He could never have imagined that the empty cave that nearly cost him his life would become a refuge for the residents of Cheshire County from war. A month later, abundant food and ample underground space have allowed the people to survive to this day. At this moment, the residents of Cheshire County, seeing the old prelate's slightly emaciated figure, revered him as though they were seeing Christ himself. Respected prelate, may the Lord bless your health. You saved my 3 children from the pagan invasion. Our family will forever remember your grace. Returning to the vast cavern, the people clutched the cross and recited the gospel to the old prelate. In that moment, they had completely forgotten the bitter outcry they had leveled against him just a year earlier over his corruption scandal. With nowhere else to turn, the old prelate had been forced to join the Mercian navy on an expedition to Scandinavia. Just a year later, the old prelate, despite past grudges, sold all his property, even his monastery, to raise food supplies to help them survive the ravages of war. This act was like Christ, on his deathbed, not harboring resentment over the stones thrown at him, but instead praying for them in his final moments. Everyone's reverence for Prelate Francis was genuine and heartfelt. Of course, what they didn't know was that it was this seemingly honest old priest who had led both Loki and averse forces to England. All the disasters had their origins in him. Leeks must be harvested alive. A shrewd Francis surely understood this principle. Therefore, he had to protect the residents of Cheshire. These devout believers, who looked upon him with reverence, would be his bread and butter in the future. Such high-quality leeks could not be allowed to die in vain. At this moment, Archbishop Francis had no interest in focusing on his parishioners. His biggest question was, why did the Viking king's troops remain stationed in Cheshire? Shouldn't they have quickly moved on to other island nations, such as Wales, to continue their plunder? According to the strategy he and Loki had agreed upon before the expedition, he would utilize the Zoroastrian intelligence network in the English Isles to monitor the movements of the saber-toothed mercenaries and relay information to Loki via ravens. However, ever since crossing the Mercian border into Cheshire, part of the Kingdom of Northumbria, the 6,000 saber-toothed mercenaries have not moved. They have camped around Lindisfarne Abbey for nearly 2 weeks. It's certain that ever, with such a large force, wasn't on a spring outing. The Vikings set sail for a single purpose, to plunder the wealth of entire nations. Setting up camp would undoubtedly defeat this purpose. What exactly did the Viking king want? Archbishop Francis racked his brains, bewildered. He clutched a quill, having written nothing for 3 days. And the secret letter he was writing should have been sent a week ago. There was only one reason for this delay. The old archbishop wanted to complete his mission as perfectly as possible. As a thoroughly selfish person, Archbishop Francis clearly understood his own value in Loki's eyes. First, he single-handedly piloted the longship, allowing him to bypass the naval blockade and enter mainland England to open the portal. Second, when Sea-Watch Fortress was under siege, it was he who leveraged the Zoroastrians to summon reinforcements for Loki. If Loki succeeded in conquering a sliver of mainland England, as he had envisioned before launching the war, Archbishop Francis would receive at least 20% of the credit. He could at least claim a hereditary noble as his own. For selfish individuals, greed knows no bounds. As his share of the spoils grew, the archbishop became increasingly eager to perfectly complete the mission assigned to him by Duke Loki. Now, observing from a distance from a tree was no longer enough to satisfy his greed. If I want more detailed, first-hand information, I must find a way to get closer. The Viking king wouldn't live in a makeshift tent like ordinary soldiers. He must be residing at Lindisfarne Abbey. And within this monastery, there are several hidden passages only I know of. Chapter 302 Francis in Action, 2. Life is full of cause and effect. 10 years ago, when the thirsty and horny Francis crawled through the tunnels, eagerly bringing fallen women to his room, he never imagined that these secret passages, used for his lower body needs, would now become his hiding place while gathering information. Over a month of survival in the wilderness had shrunk his massive frame. Under cover of darkness, he reached the outer passageway of Lindisfarne Monastery and crept into the monastery like a rat. Hidden between 2 walls, he peered through a narrow crack into the chapel on the other side. The first image that caught his eye immediately confirmed Francis's suicidal journey. Behind the Viking king lay an even greater mystery. For he now knelt respectfully before a black-robed figure. As night fell, a single brazier burned in the empty chapel. The flickering firelight revealed the familiar face of the suzerain, but today, unlike before, he was not wearing the mask that he always wore. His expression was stern. He wore no human form. However, Archbishop Francis couldn't see him at this moment, for the man's back was to the wall. All he could hear was a gloomy, hoarse voice in English. "Master, you've finally returned." Yes, the Archbishop's voice was deep and magnetic. "It's been a very turbulent time lately." Hearing this, Ever's shoulders couldn't help but tremble slightly, the instinctive reaction of extreme fear. Archbishop Francis couldn't imagine that his supposedly invincible Viking king could be so terrified of a lone stranger. Or perhaps, this wasn't even a human? Holding his breath, the old archbishop in the crack of the wall dared not even breathe. He knew he had obtained incredible intelligence tonight. This intelligence might even be more important than Duke Loki's invasion. "I've been away from this plane lately. I entered the land of the Godfall, seeking clues to the Lord of Light's past. To my surprise, in just 2 years, the dormant Leviathan was blown up. Most of the specimens preserved in Night City sank to the seabed with its corpse, while a smaller number, staring at the severe cold, dug a tunnel and successfully escaped into the ocean. 200 million years ago, when my people and the Leviathan escaped the Wall of Light, even the mighty Lord of Light couldn't find any trace of us in this world. Millions of years of accumulation by the 12 lords were destroyed in an instant, and it all started with this blind, greedy creature." With these words, the Lord extended a powerful arm, and with a strange twist of air, a black portal appeared. With a gentle pull, he pulled a bloody figure from the portal. If Loki were here, he would definitely recognize this person. For it was the unassuming security guard who had wreaked havoc at the Izumo Trading Company in Yorkshire. This greedy and foolish East Continent bastard traded a Tang Dynasty adventurer's notebook to a disciple of Ward, passing it off as a comprehensive map of the world. If it were just an ordinary Viking, it would be fine, But this Viking somehow possessed incredible luck. Not only did he kill Ward and enter the sunken city to obtain the legacy of the Crimson Creator, he also sought out the Holy Bishop, the Chosen One, who could decipher the relics of the saints, and successfully located the Leviathan's hiding place. And all of this was accomplished under your watch. If there's a sinner among the Illuminati, this beast is 90% of the blame. And you're absolutely inextricable. Terrified, Eivor wanted to argue, but he opened his mouth and said nothing. The Viking king knew full well that everything he had achieved in his first half of life, whether it was using the Holy Mountain to mass-produce the Chosen Ones of Sequence 8 in Valhalla, or entering Asgard and forging an alliance with a gatekeeper, all of this was accomplished with the help of the Illuminati. Only a handful of people knew of the Illuminati's existence, and Eivor, coincidentally, was one of them. He understood full well that this secret society, which had long manipulated the world's course from behind the scenes, was too powerful for mortals to defeat. Therefore, he dared not even offer the slightest resistance to the Master's questions, not even the most basic of explanations. He conquered the Holy Mountain, and the key to the portal to Asgard fell into his hands. For an Illuminati member, you're truly exceptional. So exceptional, in fact, that it worries me. If I hadn't personally inducted you back then, I would have even suspected you were a spy for the Freemasons. Eivor, always so arrogant, paled. Beads of sweat dripped down his cheeks in the chill of the early spring breeze. My lord, please give me one more chance. I will return and slay this thief and reclaim the portal to Asgard. The Master gazed at the kneeling Viking king, silent for a long moment, before finally letting out a long sigh. He had already made up his mind. The Asgard portal key is no more than 5 centimeters long and wide. If you push him too far, he'll throw it into the sea, and the Illuminati won't be able to enter Asgard for another 10,000 years. Eivor, you are one of the few intelligent Vikings. For over 20 years, you've painstakingly cultivated the Holy Mountain, helping my people enter Asgard to research and develop potions. You've made a real contribution to our people. If you have any last words, you can say them now. The Viking king knew these words would come sooner or later. But when he heard them, he still felt deeply humiliated. This whole thing was caused by that Loki. What does it have to do with me? I rule my people. How can I possibly monitor the daily activities of a village chief in a shabby village? In that instant, deep-seated anger suddenly overwhelmed him. His position in the Illuminati was not high. But in Scandinavia, he was, after all, the Viking king. The blood of Olaf, the bloody conqueror, still flowed through his veins. He would never accept death. He cast a sinister glance at the suzerain. Noticing his back, Eivor unsheathed the saber-toothed blade hanging from his waist. In a flash of lightning, he harnessed the power of Stormcaller to coat the bone blade with a fine layer of lightning. However, just as he was about to pierce the suzerain's back, he heard a sneer of contempt. The suzerain turned, and the slight upward curve of his lips reminded him that he was now facing Mewtwo, one of the 12 suzerains of the Illuminati and the true ruler of the Western continent, Lord of Earthsea. Eivor tried to pull out the arrow-toothed leopard fang at his side, but just as his fingers moved a centimeter, Mewtwo softly snapped his fingers. He collapsed silently to the ground like a bag of rice losing its support. He's a good man, and very loyal, but I have to admit, we're once again standing in the midst of a momentous change. Eivor's abilities are no longer sufficient to quell this conflict. Black Shark, you've been with him for quite some time. You'll complete the remaining tasks. A crooked figure emerged from the shadows of the chapel. Due to the distance, Archbishop Francis couldn't see his face clearly. But as he approached Eivor's silent body, he reached behind his head with his hands and, surprisingly, peeled off a whole layer of human skin. The dim light from the brazier illuminated a blood-stained green figure. A lizardman materialized before the old archbishop. Before his expedition to Scandinavia, Archbishop Francis had seen little of the world. His vision was inferior to Jerome, who had traveled extensively with his mentor. In terms of courage, he was far from a ranger. As such a terrifying and bizarre scene unfolded before his eyes, he tried his best to hold his breath, but the narrow crack in the wall couldn't withstand even the slightest tremor of his massive frame. Hearing a slight noise from the wall behind him, Black Shark turned around. He casually ripped up the chapel's cross and slammed it against the fragile brick wall. A cascade of bricks, accompanied by smoke and dust, fell in front of him. In the empty cracks of the wall, several rats, injured by the broken bricks, struggled desperately. Chapter 303 Flying Dragon Mountains. 3 days later, 400 kilometers away, in the Kingdom of Wessex. Just when everyone expected Loki to march straight into Southampton, the capital of Wessex, he suddenly turned his army around and entered the Dragon Mountains west of Stone Forest County. This was a reversal, completely out of step with Viking marching habits. The Dragon Mountains contain nothing but dragons. 100 years ago, this area was a desolate highland, covered only by sparse grass and wild packs of steppe wolves. The kingdom of Wessex was fertile land, and farmers, earning huge profits from cultivating wheat and growing fruit, disdained the nomadic, arduous, and tiring lifestyle of herding. Therefore, for a long time, the only creatures roaming these desolate lands were wild beasts, wanted fugitives, and homeless wanderers. 100 years ago, the first ruler, Cadwalla, forged an alliance with a Plantagenet family through marriage and trade. He invested heavily in the French duchy, purchased dragon eggs, and regularly sent outstanding scholars there to learn dragon language. Thus, the Flying Dragon Mountains finally found their purpose. Across this vast, desolate continent, the soaring dragons could build nests and seek mates as they pleased. The vast wasteland and sparse population also prevented these ferocious beasts from raiding farmhouses and wreaking havoc on the people. To ensure the healthy growth of the dragon population, Cadwalla initially purchased 20 different species. 10,000 years ago, dragons and giants were as commonplace across the continents as sparrows and moles. 10,000 years later, rare subspecies can still be found in the desolate mountains. The powerful nations of France and Byzantium in the western continent frequently sent explorers into these uninhabited regions to search for them. As a result, today, there are as many as 50 dragons capable of being trained as riders. Given ample food, water, and a habitat, dragons can reproduce freely. Raising dragons isn't a problem across every continent. The real challenge lies in training humans capable of riding them. Those who dare to live in the Dragon Mountains are all dragon-tongued scholars of Wessex. They reside in Dragonstone Fortress, their daily routine being to feed the dragons. They also observe the dragons mating, their lives, and their language through telescopes. 10,000 years ago, the dragons' natural enemies were giants, but giants are now extinct. Any creature without a natural enemy, if left unchecked, will inevitably experience explosive growth. Upon entering the Dragon Mountains, Loki's troops were attacked by dragons at least 10 times. However, he remained unfazed. Kill these flying beasts, strip their scales, and don't forget to bottle the precious dragon blood. Don't forget to enter their nests and collect their eggs. The fighting abilities of domesticated pigs in pens differ greatly from those of wild boars roaming the mountains, relying on the elements for survival and hunting. Similarly, the subspecies of dragons, well-fed, lazily basking in the sun and occasionally competing for mates, are no match for their wild ancestors in the wilderness. However, this weak species is perfectly suited to helping the frost giants, newly freed from their confinement, adapt to new life. Loki hasn't forgotten the frost giants now carving out a new home in the Skybreak Mountains. For the few ancient creatures that have emerged from their cozy confines, the wolves and bears of the Skybreak Mountains simply can't quickly reawaken the remaining battle memories in their bloodlines. But these dragons can. They aren't exceptionally powerful, but they're certainly no match for the fragile native creatures. After entering the Flying Dragon Mountains, Loki captured dragons and caged them, while also pursuing the dragon-tongued scholars of Wessex. Once captured, he would activate the blood-red stone statues and throw the caged dragons and dragon-tongued scholars inside. Once the war was over, he would return to the sky-severing mountains and release them. Any creature that desired strength ultimately needed to live under pressure, and these dragons and dragon-tongued scholars would surely put the frost giants under sufficient pressure. After all, they were not released as pets, but to be used together against the powerful Aesir. After plundering the Flying Dragon Mountains from north to south, this isolated island in the sea suffered a devastating disaster. 10 days later, when his troops emerged from the Flying Dragon Mountains, the province had almost returned to its former tranquility and emptiness. Standing before Loki were the last few dragon-tongued scholars on the island, reluctant to leave. Loki was reluctant to confront them too harshly. Like Admiral Waldorf, whom he had met while sailing, these men were also blind believers in the Socratic school of the Western continent. Knowing their faith would bring them no benefit, these simply dressed researchers remained rooted here, braving the constant danger of being devoured by dragons, living alongside these behemoths that had survived from ancient times. They were pure scientists. My fellow men, you don't want gold coins, you don't want women, you don't want a castle built just for you. What do you want? Inside the humble dragonstone fortress, Loki piled a large pile of Wessex gold pounds onto the table and spoke helplessly to the gray-bearded middle-aged men across from him. This time, he didn't underestimate the wealth of Wessex. After conquering Stone Forest County, he was surprised to discover how people could truly change. 2 years ago, he had looted the impoverished Slavs, not sparing even a single salted fish. However, just 2 years later, Loki no longer cared about silver coins, for the city's gold pounds were simply too plentiful. Stone Forest County guards the stone bridge leading to the Mercian Plateau. With this bridge alone, Duke Luke amassed unimaginable wealth. A casual search of several large shops and warehouses in the Rainfall Highlands yielded nearly 100 chests of Wessex gold pounds. When a nation's productivity reaches a certain level, gold coins pile up before one's eyes like scrap metal. Your Excellency, if possible, I hope you will spare us old folks lives so we can complete our unfinished research, the middle-aged dragon language scholar said hesitantly. He had long recognized the young man before him as the much-talked-about Viking invader. He harbored a fear. However, this fear wasn't about losing his life, but about his unfinished research. Loki chuckled dryly. Brothers, I have seen people like you before, and I know what you are looking for, I said. Not only can dragons live in my territory, I also have fresh frost giants who have just been rescued from Asgard. They are an ancient tribe that has been extinct in this land for nearly 10,000 years. As far as research is concerned, simply studying dragons can never compare to the excitement of watching giants fighting dragons. The dragon language scholars looked at each other, but after just a few seconds, they shook their heads at the same time. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 304 Sect Master. For millennia, intellectuals have been the most difficult subjects for lords to deal with. This isn't because they're exceptionally bright, but rather because they're quite dumb. Those who are too brilliant are destined to never advance far in academic research, as the temptations of the mundane world can easily draw them back into the glamorous realities of society. Their focus inevitably shifts from solving difficult problems to achieving higher social status. 90% of so-called scholars embrace and pursue this shift. When distractions arise, their academic progress naturally stalls. Pure scholars are the most difficult people in the world to deal with. Beyond their inner beliefs and research achievements, they turn a blind eye to the world. In the early days of the Red Nation, countless overseas researchers abandoned high salaries and prestigious social positions to return to their homeland, which was in ruins. They shared a single lingering conviction. But then again, if such individuals had emerged among pure humans, society would have needed at least another 600 years of development. It wasn't until the Renaissance that the humanistic spirit revived. Only when the Dark Ages recede will the dawn of civilization arrive again. During the Dark Ages, ordinary humans struggling to make ends meet could never reach this spiritual realm. Only Emra Waldorf, born into a wealthy family, could forsake all temptations and pursue truth. The only other group of people were the lizardmen clad in human skin, whom Loki encountered on the Holy Mountain and in Asgard. Through 200 million years of evolution and their subtle manipulation of the world, the lizardmen have established a racial system that transcends humanity, bordering on religion. Gears and Sullivan are the most devoted scholars Loki has ever encountered. Even when faced with no escape and desperate circumstances, the lingering conviction in their hearts remains the determination to spare no effort, to do whatever it takes to survive. Only by staying alive can they pass on their research findings to their tribe. Now, when these dragon language scholars, unwilling to leave despite the temptations of gold, women, and castles, appeared before him, Loki's first thought was of the two lizardmen. Among these old men, there was a strong possibility that one of those bastards in human skin was also hiding. He nodded, then signaled to Satyr and Glor beside him, who immediately understood his intention. They stood near the gate, blocking it with their bodies. Meanwhile, the fortress's gates were surrounded by elite warriors under Duke Mocklash and Duke Phoenix. These were the first core members who had followed him into Asgard to explore the land. They had all witnessed the terrifying light giants after drinking the golden potion, and they knew the living conditions of the lizardmen hidden in the human world. With all preparations complete, the room fell into a brief silence. Loki looked at the dragon language scholars. They exchanged awkward glances. Then, without warning, He drew a long knife and slashed through the old scholar chest. A bright full moon vanished, and as blue and green lizard scales appeared behind the ripped human skin, Loki flashed him a cruel smile. I've seen your kind before, and if you're truly as powerful as I imagined, stop pretending. You must have heard my name. Lizardmen are a group with a very clear division of labor. With their evolutionary direction already determined, these creatures will either strengthen their offensive capabilities or their defensive capabilities. Loki had long since concluded that the Mjolnir's offensive power wasn't strong. Therefore, he felt no fear towards these ancient monsters, even a touch of mockery. From Old Valder to the destruction of Leviathan, the killing of Girth, and Sullivan, Loki knew that the Illuminati and he were locked in an irreconcilable blood feud. Too many lice won't bite, and too many debts won't worry. As he journeyed from Frostwater Village to Storm's End, from Storm's End to Mercia, and from Mercia to Wessex, gradually moving from the fringes of the wilderness closer to civilization, he knew that he would inevitably have more and more close encounters with the Illuminati. These dragon language scholars, clad in human skin, were his first surprise upon entering Wessex. The people of the East Continent often say, those not of my kind must have different hearts. Even if you ugly creatures wanted to submit, I wouldn't dare accept them. Frankly, I'm not getting dragon eggs and dragon seedlings from you just to write on them. Back home, I have another group of friends who are eager for something new. With all due respect, I have no use for you. If you have any last words, you can say them now. In the center of the spacious reception room, a blazing fire had been lit by his men using books and papyrus scrolls. Seeing the steel pitchforks, each over a man's height, the lizardmen immediately understood what this terrifying overlord intended for them. But unlike Ears or Sullivan, these men showed no sign of panic. Lord Loki, the Illuminati are not your enemy. Although we have had many misunderstandings, you have demonstrated your abilities to the entire Western continent. You are a person who is deeply knowledgeable about the culture of the Eastern continent. You certainly understand that conquering the enemy without fighting is the highest realm of warfare. In this land, the Illuminati can grant you everything you desire. All you need to do is swear allegiance to the Lord. He will grant you everything that once belonged to the O'Sullivan family. You will become the new king of the Vikings. Today was a long day of flying, followed by work and drinking. I'm not feeling well. Forgive me if there are any errors. I'll correct them tomorrow. I'm feeling dizzy right now. Chapter 305, Green Valley and Stoneham Fortress. This wasn't the first time Loki had heard the word suzerain. 2 years ago, when he first entered Yorkshire and exchanged the overall map of the world with the guard at the Izumo Trading Company, he'd heard from the guard, the suzerain is about to return. Thinking back to the time he'd mentioned, it was almost exactly that time. In the obsidian pyramid, he'd seen 12 lizard men statues surrounding the Zhuan Yuan sword, and he knew the suzerain the guard had spoken of must be one of those 12. These 12 faces had frequently appeared in news reports in the 21st century, before his time travel. Each of them was a jebel of a conglomerate or a dignitary of a major power. Their faces were familiar to the vast majority of Earth's 7 billion inhabitants. By that time, the Illuminati had completely controlled the world in every sphere, political, economic, and cultural. They no longer needed to disguise themselves and hide in the shadows. In this life, they were clearly still forging ahead. Suzerains still didn't dare to stand openly and enjoy the sweetness of power like they do in the 21st century. They also needed to recruit allies and support the pawns of the human world as their right-hand men. The pitiful monarchs of the Middle Ages considered being pawns a great honor. Little did they know, they were all cannon fodder thrust into the spotlight. These lizardmen in human skin, however, could be safe forever. Loki didn't answer, nor did he say anything extraneous. A Viking army doesn't keep idlers. Having no interest in dragon riding, he didn't want to keep these dragon-tongued scholars. This trip into Dragonstone had captured nearly 100 young dragons and taken hundreds of dragon eggs. He had gotten everything he wanted. These lizardmen learning the dragon tongue could only face death. Beheading these extremely tenacious creatures was not an option. Therefore, he ordered his men to dig a pit 20 meters deep. They twisted the lizardmen's joints, bound them with dragon sinew, and then tossed them into the pit. Then, huge stones over a man's height and a large amount of moist earth were pushed into the cave. The lizardmen were destined for a burial alive. They might survive for a long time beneath the earth, but no sound could be heard from the 20-meter deep pit. They were ultimately destined to be devoured by the earth. After leaving Dragonstone, Loki led his army toward the next province. Seeing the neighboring province, Greenvale, equally undefended, he paused. This journey seemed too smooth. So smooth that it seemed unreal. After crossing the border between Mercia and Wessex, Stonewood County was devoid of defense. It could be understood that they had already emerged in full force, following Andrew Evans to be annihilated by him. The Flying Dragon Mountains were unguarded, perhaps because they were a breeding ground for dragons and unsuitable for garrisons. This was understandable, but now, he had conquered 2 of Wessex's 5 provinces. He had entered Greenvale, the largest province in the central region. This was Wessex's main transportation hub, accessible in all directions. It was logical that they would deploy a heavy defense there. However, the Viking army advanced relentlessly, even approaching Stoneham, Green Valley's main city. Still, no one appeared. This, in turn, made him pause. By this time, the Three Kingdoms era had long since passed. But Luo Guanzhong wouldn't be born for another 500 years before he wrote about the empty city strategy. Experts simply couldn't grasp such a profound tactic. Moreover, even the ruler wouldn't be so foolish as to try to play the empty city strategy with a bunch of leeches. What was he planning? Loki didn't pause. Instead, he followed the Vikings' usual raiding tactics. Upon sighting a city, he immediately prepared to attack. For one thing, the Vikings were never a regular army. They had no idea of forming formations, employing the telescopic advance of infantry and cavalry phalanxes. This loosely organized group of warriors had no training, and they had no grasp of the essence of group warfare. The Vikings' attacking method was to charge like a pack of hungry wolves upon sighting their target, chopping down any moving target with their axes. However, as the roaring Viking army rapidly approached Stoneham, Loki's sense of something amiss grew. This fortress was too quiet. It was nearing dawn, and smoke curled from the city walls. The drawbridge over the moat hung at a 45-degree angle, as if no battle had ever occurred in this land. That's wrong. Stonewood and Dragonstone have already been raging like this, and I've been leading my army into Wessex for nearly a month. Even the most imprudent English duke stationed here should have at least reinforced the gates and deployed more troops to defend the walls. Loki paused, but the Vikings beside him showed no sign of stopping. He drew the hatchet from his waist and hurled it through the air. The divine power granted by Flame Berserker transformed the swirling hatchet into a blazing wheel of fire. It slashed through the chains holding the gates, instantly severing them. With a resounding roar, the drawbridge lowered. The path into the city was now clear. But there were no cries, no shouts. The open gates of Stoneham were as silent as a grave. If everyone in the city had safely evacuated, where would the smoke from the chimneys rise? Danger. Evacuate the city first. We must be prepared for a trap. Sensing something was amiss, Loki shouted, but the impoverished Vikings had never before stormed such a magnificent fortress. Their minds, consumed by the sheer excitement of their invasion, had long since lost their ability to reason. Entering the rooms, they expertly rummaged through the drawers, searching for treasure. They grabbed food from the chopping boards and ate it without a second thought, whether it was edible or not. Loki knew he was leading an undisciplined army. Standing outside the city, his face grim, he felt a Viking's assimilation into civilized society was an almost insurmountable task. He waited quietly, waiting for an explosion to erupt in the city, for flames to erupt. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes passed. The hours dragged on, and nothing happened. Crate after crate of silver coins was carried out onto the streets, and the jingling copper pennies tumbled freely, with the excited Vikings barely even stooping to pick them up. In the Lord's chambers, exquisite gold ornaments and jewel-encrusted armor lay abandoned. Not a single piece, including the tang silks worn by the women, had been removed during the evacuation. Greenvale was the largest province in central Wessex and the kingdom's transportation hub. All goods shipped from the English Channel to Wessex transited through Stoneham Fortress in Greenvale. Shipments bound for Wessex and Northumbria flowed north into Stoneham. Shipments bound for East Anglia, East Saxony, and Kent flowed east into the Lowells. Stoneham was, therefore, a massive city even richer than the Rainfall Heights. Even in its sheer grandeur and scale, it rivaled the Viking king's seat, the Conqueror's Keep. What Loki couldn't understand was that the fortress he had entered didn't look at all like an abandoned one. First, the lords organized the residents to flee. They might not have had time to pack their clothes, but they would definitely take away gold and silver. This was the result of their life's hard work, and there was no reason for them to leave it there. But at this time, The gold pounds and silver coins carried to the streets by the Viking warriors had almost covered the entire street. Secondly, with Stonehelm Fortress being as strong as Sea-Watch Fortress, there was no need for them to abandon such a strong city. Green Valley Province was the center of Wessex, and all roads ended at Stonehelm Fortress. If Loki's troops were sent to guard this fortress, they would suffer serious casualties. There was no doubt about it. Egbert was no fool, otherwise he would not have allowed the 6 kingdoms of England to rise and fall under his feet. He must have his reasons for doing so. But what exactly was this reason? Chapter 306, Mistcaller. Loki couldn't control the energized Vikings under Duke Mocklash and Duke Phoenix. Therefore, he could only lead his personal guards from the river valley to the watchtower, keeping a watchful eye on any possible troops appearing on the horizon. However, all day passed, until dusk fell, and not a single figure emerged from the official road. Only a thick, cloud-like fog appeared. The English Isles, influenced by ocean currents and monsoon winds, are naturally foggy. Especially in early spring, while the surface waters remain cold, the land, having been exposed to sunlight all day and the plants beneath the soil beginning to sprout and awaken, has accumulated heat. When this damp, cold air meets the warming ground, it inevitably condenses into floating water droplets. Frequent nighttime fog is a common natural phenomenon across the 4 islands. The sudden appearance of the fog didn't alarm Loki until dusk, when the pitch black, white fog completely enveloped the entire city. Only when he heard the first screams from the dense fog did he keenly sense the approaching danger. Lord Mistcaller, long time no see, outside Stonehelm, Egbert was commanding his troops to completely encircle the fortress. He unhesitatingly deployed all his forces on this march, a full 40,000 well-equipped heavy infantry and 10,000 free pirates, urgently transported from the free cities of the Visigoths at great expense. These men were essentially the same military type as the Vikings, though their ranks were more inclusive and their tactics more varied. Within the ranks of the free pirates, individuals of all skin colors and wielding varying divine powers were common. Among them were registered disciples from the Eastern Tang dynasty, long-time practitioners with little to show for their cultivation. There were also barbaric followers from the cannibal tribes of the New World, and even black slaves from the northern continent, herding hyenas and vultures to hunt in the Black Desert. In the chaotic free cities, any pirate who managed to survive was generally a true talent. With sufficient pay, they would become mercenaries, helping the lords of the western continent resolve their troubles. 10,000 Visigoth pirates weren't enough to reassure Egbert. He even recruited 50,000 holy bishops from the 5 provinces, vowing to amass a force of 100,000 to confront Loki to the death. However, just as he was about to march his troops to Stonehelm, a mysterious figure entered his bedroom in the foggy night. He recognized him. The rulers of the western continent called him Mistcaller. Mistcaller only appeared human in appearance, but his true nature had nothing to do with humanity. He was a living deity who had long roamed the Isles of England. Unlike most true gods who sought altars and embraced the people's faith and worship, Mistcaller had no interest in sharing his power. Just as some humans forsake fame, wealth, desire, and community to seek a remote, desolate mountain and a herd of beasts, Creator was one of these somewhat solitary outer gods. No one in this land knew his exact age or where he came from. According to ancient animal skin scrolls, the Mistcaller has existed on these remote floating islands since the days of the Celts. His body resembles a human's, but he lacks limbs. His arms are tentacles, and he moves by extending a massive soft tentacles from the bottom of his robe, similar to a mollusk's. His face is almost always hidden beneath a thick hood, revealing only a chin resembling that of a marine creature. This chin is perpetually damp and dripping with water. The Mistcaller disdains human interaction, knowing that compared to his own, almost infinite lifespan, the fragile human lifespan spans only 50 or 60 years, no different from a flying insect born at dawn and dying at dusk. On this continent, he associates only with a few outer gods who share his nearly infinite lifespan. Among them are the 12 lords of the Illuminati, and Mewtwo, the Lord of Earthsea. For any living being, interaction with its kind is inevitable. The same was true for the Mistcaller. Surviving on Earth, where spiritual energy was dwindling, he inevitably encountered numerous unexpected situations and needed to rely on the Illuminati, the secretive powerhouses of the world. As the only surviving deity with a permanent ally residing in the English Isles, the Mistcaller was naturally summoned by the Illuminati when the maverick Loki appeared. The dense fog that now swirled around Stonehelm was his creation. Having managed a nation as vast as Wessex, Egbert was naturally aware of the Illuminati. Upon discovering that Loki had alerted the Illuminati, and that their leaders were willing to deploy their powerful deities to eliminate him, shock was insufficient to describe his shock. In his eyes, the 20-year-old Viking lord was already a dead man, just as a human wouldn't stare at a fly near them. The mist-caller didn't respond to Egbert's polite words, not even turning to glance back. A faint white mist drifted around them. In the twilight, Egbert could see the torches of his troops, but the slightly more distant Stanahelm fortress was completely engulfed in thick fog. In places where the mist thinned, he could occasionally make out a few massive figures moving through. Each of these monstrous creatures cloaked in the fog stood over 10 meters tall. Their forms were obscured by the dense fog, but their muffled breathing and heavy footsteps could be heard. In his youth, Egbert had once ventured deep into the city of the Scarlet Creator and witnessed the terrifying ancient gods hidden within human civilization. But the generals, knights, and soldiers who accompanied him on this expedition had never witnessed such a terrifying sight. In the vast twilight, the terrifying howling and the looming presence of strange monsters filled the air. They could not imagine any escape for the Vikings trapped in the fortress, in the pitch-black darkness. But then, a powerful javelin flew through the thick fog, and a tragic line of blood exploded through the white mist. Waves of roaring sounds came from the darkness, sometimes approaching, sometimes moving away, until a terrifying monster with bony wings was kicked out of the thick fog. Lightning, hurricanes, and charging berserkers rushed out of the thick fog like a surging tide. There is something I need to tell all my book friends. Since May 1st, my new editions have stopped, and the average subscription has been declining. It has been declining for 7 consecutive days today, 190,182. I guess I may have been abandoned by the website, so you can stop giving me rewards and monthly tickets. Go support other surviving books. I will finish writing this chapter. If there is still no improvement, I will finish it after this chapter. After all, the more I write, the lower the average subscription will be. If I continue like this, I will have mental problems, covering my face. Chapter 307 Counterattack. As a thick fog enveloped Stanahelm and enormous monsters began to emerge from the mist, Loki acted decisively, ordering everyone to halt their search and move closer to him. However, Stanahelm was a vast city, its floor area comparable to that of the Conqueror's fortress. The thick, white fog descended without warning, and with dusk approaching and the sun setting, the entire army was instantly plunged into pitch-black darkness. The sudden onset of danger demanded an immediate response from Loki, but a blinded army could only rely on subtle sounds to navigate. These sounds, bouncing off the dense stone structures within the fortress, quickly became muffled. The monsters, looming in the fog, began to attack indiscriminately. If the Vikings, driven by fear, began to indiscriminately attack everything around them, the army would collapse in an instant. At this moment, Loki's savior stepped in. She was Elizabeth Ella. Following the Viking army, Elizabeth had always stood guard by her father's side. Now, when the monster emerged from the fog, the young woman immediately sensed danger. She raised her hands and whispered a spell not of this world. Then, a blazing sun appeared between her hands, its pure white light dispelling the darkness and allowing everyone in the city to see the direction they were heading. If they could unite the Vikings, each fighting their own battles in the darkness, and prevent them from fighting each other in the pitch-black fog, they might be able to turn the tide. Guided by the holy light, the Vikings, wielding their axes, charged through the dense fog with a clear direction. After gathering thousands of men, Loki acted decisively, ordering a breakout outside the city gates. It didn't matter what direction, or where they rushed. As long as everyone charged together, slashing at every non-human monster before them, they would surely escape the fog's reach. Sure enough, after only a few thousand meters, they reached the outskirts of Wessex's encirclement. How could these damned Vikings be so strong? Could it be that this 20-something young man has truly found a way into Asgard? As the rumors say, Egbert didn't have time to think, as a mangled corpse flew overhead, accompanied by a mournful cry. Loki and his Viking army had already reached his line. Defend, hold them with all your might. Hoplites, drive your tower shields into the ground, and spearmen in the back row, thrust your spears. Don't think they're intimidating, they're just like us, flesh and blood. We just need to focus on the initial surge, the rest is our home turf. The centurions galloped, trying to stabilize their somewhat disorganized formation. However, the western continent hadn't seen the true people of Odin in centuries. The sea giants charging at the forefront wielded their mighty axes, each as tall as a man, easily cleaving hoplites in two, shield and all. Following behind them, the berserkers and Valkyrie pathfinders charged into the formation, ruthlessly harvesting the lives of the rear ranks. Even the elephants brought by the Visigothic pirates from the free cities proved no match for the giants' onslaught. Mountain giants, casually uprooting thick tree stumps, swung the trees, easily crushing and overturning the elephants. Once their soft, unarmored bellies were exposed, the berserkers following in their wake would swiftly gut the fallen beasts, dispatching the black-skinned slaves pinned beneath them with a few axe blows. In a matter of moments, the once sturdy line was shattered. Egbert turned, surprised to see the mist-caller, standing not far from him, fade, thin, and silently melt into the mist. He drew his sword and attempted to lead the battle himself, but the Red Queen, Iphitus, grasped his arm and gently shook her head. The full divine might of my bloody creator lineage relies on the blood mist illusion to unleash. The thick fog summoned by the mist-caller will greatly devour the psychic energy floating in the air. In this situation, the blood mist illusion cannot be activated. Your Majesty, we cannot guarantee your safety. My suggestion, evacuate first, and then make plans. For years, Egbert had been able to escape unscathed from every situation, relying on Iphitus and her Crimson Apostles. He knew the power of the bloody creator's chosen ones. However, he also understood their limitations. Without the ability to generate the blood mist illusion, the Crimson Apostles' combat capabilities were not much stronger than those of ordinary chosen ones. At this moment, the pervasive white fog would greatly suppress the generation of the blood mist illusion. Seeing the encircled Viking warriors about to attack him, Egbert had no choice but to follow Iphitus and temporarily leave the battlefield. With the king's departure, the already nearly crumbling defenses collapsed almost instantly. The Wessex phalanx was still able to maintain its formation under the firm control of its mid-level non-commissioned officers, but the Visigothic pirates on the other side of the encirclement had already been thrown to the ground. In the spreading fog, the mysterious monsters summoned by the mist-caller could not distinguish between Vikings and English. These ancient creatures, cloaked in the mist, attack all humans indiscriminately. While the monsters' combat power was not incredibly strong, these creatures, kept within the mist by the mist-caller, were terrifying in appearance and white in color. They could appear and disappear swiftly, relying on the fog to create a psychological terror that the Visigothic pirates had never experienced before. Once separated from their formation, they would indiscriminately attack any living creature that approached. In a moment, the Visigothic pirate camp was in chaos. The Vikings, with no sense of direction in the thick fog, had stumbled upon the Visigothic pirate positions. Naturally, they easily overwhelmed their defenses. Unlike the uninformed Visigoth pirates, most of the Vikings in Loki's group had personally entered Asgard and witnessed bloody battles with the monsters of the lands of frost and fire. In their eyes, the creatures summoned by the mist-caller were merely ordinary monsters. Even when they felled them, the Vikings attempted to pluck out their eyes and harvest their organs. This was a habit ingrained from their long years of hunting in Asgard. They would cut down any large, hideous monster, regardless of its form, gouge out its eyes and rip out its heart, gathering whatever they could first. Even after surging out of the dense fog without looking back, many of Loki's Vikings still carried the dead white monsters whole on their backs, intending to wait until the battle was over for a more complete autopsy. Shaking his head helplessly, he counted the number of people, but found only about 3,000 had followed him out of the fog. Duke Mocklash and Duke Phoenix were no longer with the group. What's even worse is that Elizabeth and Ulysses, father and daughter, also disappeared in the breakout. Chapter 308, Merendin's Request for Help. Brother Gruer, I have a difficult task for you. I need you to lead a dozen of your men to plunder a merchant ship in Wessex, cross the North Sea, and return to Storm's End to bring me reinforcements. Don't worry about the details. Explain our situation to Merendin. Leave the rest to her. Before he finished speaking, Loki removed a necklace from his neck and placed it in Gruer's hand. It was a token given to him by Merendin before he set out on his expedition. The necklace he had won from Tifa Bernard in Conqueror's Bastion. Crafted by Simidas, the bone spirit craftsman of Paris, each necklace is a unique treasure, impossible to replicate. That day, after winning the fiefdom token of Storm's End, he presented the necklace to Merendin as a prize. However, their relationship quickly blossomed after they slept together. Before he set out on his expedition, the Viking princess returned the necklace, which he had always worn, to him as a blessing of good luck. And so, After a long journey, it finally returned to his hands. As long as Girard returned with the necklace, Merindon would know he was delivering his orders. "Boss, then, don't worry about me," Loki said in a deep voice. "Duke Mocklash and Duke Phoenix are our allies. As for Ulysses Allah and his daughter, they are even more important hostages we cannot abandon. I know that returning to the fog to rescue them will inevitably result in casualties and lead to encirclement. But this is a move I must make. I have no choice. Life is not a journey to be fought alone. On this journey, commoners need friends, and monarchs, too, must have companions to stand with them on the journey." Duke Mocklash and Duke Phoenix, now following Loki's lead, possessed the most precious quality of a subordinate, loyalty. Whenever his saber-toothed mercenaries appeared, they did not defect, but remained steadfast by Loki's side. Such allies, even through the dangers of war, Loki must do everything he can to save them. Of course, even more important, was Ulysses' women. During the Three Kingdoms period, Cao commanded the vast majority of the world's most talented generals and a million-strong army. He still sought to use the emperor as a hostage to control the other princes, as obedience to the emperor was the unwritten rule of the land. Similarly, for the Vikings to survive on English soil, King Ulysses of Mercia must survive. If he died, and Prince Lancelot ascended to power, Loki, with no other recourse, would have no choice but to exterminate the Mercian royal family. But would this action trigger even greater slaughter, perhaps even leading to a rebellion against all Mercians? No one could predict. Returning to the thick fog at this point was extremely dangerous. While he couldn't yet pinpoint the source of this strange fog, it was undoubtedly man-made. Wessex possessed not only dragons, but also weapons beyond Loki's comprehension. By the time he found the two dukes and Ulysses in the mist, Loki wondered if he could escape Wessex's encirclement. If he were completely surrounded within Stonhelm, he must rely on a sufficiently reliable ally to help him resolve this crisis. At this point in the war, Archbishop Francis had accomplished all he could. After careful consideration, he decided to leave the remaining tasks to Merindon. The reason was simple: Merindon also needed him to conquer England. The Viking princess Merindon was unlike the traditional women of the Western continent. Born into a royal Viking family and raised in the prosperous city of Constantinople, she possessed both the blood of a Viking and the noble temperament and intelligence cultivated by a thorough upbringing. Her life goal was not to be a lord's wife bearing children. Rather, it was to enter the Senate of Constantinople and participate in decisions that would influence the entire Western continent. The Slavic invasion of England last winter had set her career back to square one. She sought to regain her seat in the Senate. She had two choices. 1. Loki Starlag, the newly appointed Duke of the River Valley. 2. Her brother, the Viking King Ivar O'Sullivan. On paper, Ivar, bearing the title of Viking King, was undoubtedly far more powerful. However, as the saying goes, only the drinking water can truly reveal its warmth or coldness. When it came to truly pursuing his desired goals, Ivar wasn't as effective as Merindon had imagined. This was due to their differing philosophies. Essentially, Ivar possessed talent but lacked ambition. He was content to be a mercenary lord living in a remote area. He had no interest in the struggle for supremacy in the Western continent. It was precisely because of these qualities that he was valued by the Illuminati. The Illuminati sought loyal lackeys, not greedy wolves. But Merindon desired none of these things. As a weak woman, though powerless, she possessed a far greater thirst for power than Ivar. Growing up in the prosperous Constantinople, she had witnessed a true face of a wealthy nation and had always yearned for power. Consequently, she actively sought investment in Scandinavia, attempting to leverage this barbaric land into political leverage. But now, all was lost. The demise of all her business allies had caused Merindon's standing in Constantinople to plummet. She desperately needed a ticket back in. Ivar, who simply wanted to protect his family business and diligently serve the Illuminati, could not offer her this precious ticket. Following Ivar would only mean marrying an illiterate Viking lord who hadn't bathed in 3 years. In the Game of Thrones, she would be completely eliminated. But Loki was different. After his expedition to England, he sought to enter the civilized world, and he needed a business genius in every way. Loki's chambers were empty, and she was his only woman. As long as the two of them managed Loki's expansion, she would maintain the kingdom's economy from behind. With her abilities, she would sooner or later return to Constantinople. Not as a commoner, but respectfully invited in by the Byzantine Emperor, Michael III. So, 10 days later, When Merindin saw Geralt appear in Storm's End, wearing the necklace, she gravely inquired about Loki's situation. After a brief hour of contemplation, the Viking princess didn't waste a moment. She summoned Jerome to explain the situation, then, accompanied by several winged guards, mounted her steed and headed for the harbor outside Storm's End. Wars between nations are never mere riotous strife. In a protracted war, some wield the swords, others transport supplies, and, naturally, others gather allies behind the scenes. Only through the concerted efforts of all can victory be achieved. Merindin knew it was time to demonstrate her abilities for Loki. Leading her guards and assembling 3 longships, the Viking princess set sail in silence. The bows faced east. That was the land of the Slavs. Sorry. I have another full day of flights today. I just finished all my work. Chapter 309 The Strength of the Illuminati. 10 days later, Stonehelm. The situation we face now is this: a faint mist still hung within the fortress, but after 10 days, most of the surviving Vikings had become accustomed to navigating its path. The fog thinned at noon after sunrise. During this brief lull, Loki gathered his men in Stonehelm's meeting hall. Everyone sat together, a large papyrus scroll in the center. 12 days ago, just as we entered Stonehelm, this fog-summoning octopus man appeared. Loki pointed to a large upright octopus outside the fortress. Through recent battles, I've discovered that this giant octopus, capable of hiding in the mist at any time, may look intimidating, but in terms of strength, it's not a serious threat. The difficulty with this creature lies in its ability to appear and disappear in the thick fog. But after several days of dealing with it, it's undeniable that all these white monsters that emerge from the fog are incredibly weak. The commanders present all nodded in agreement. 10 days ago, after they became separated in the thick fog, Loki returned and battled through the dense mist for 2 full days before finding all his lost companions. Almost every Viking was wounded, but at least 80% of the wounds were from internecine violence caused by blindness. The remaining 20% were inflicted by the seemingly terrifying, but in reality quite weak, white monsters. After the initial panic subsided, Loki began organizing his men to enter the fog in large numbers to hunt monsters. Within the fog, he discovered an interesting phenomenon. Just as the blood mist illusion melted human corpses, the white monsters that fell in the fog would dissipate in the thick fog like ice in the sun, becoming nutrients for the fog once again. In recent days, they have developed a new experience. After killing the monsters in the mist, the Viking warriors would drag them back to Stonehelm Fortress, then activate the blood-red stone statues and throw the monsters' bodies into the sunken city. After a few days of this repetition, the thick white fog, unable to break down its nutrients, began to thin rapidly to the naked eye, often barely concealing the slender, 5-meter tall figure of the mist caller. Each time this eerie god emerged from the mist, the Vikings charged, axes raised and roaring, sending it fleeing in terror. After 10 days, no one considered it a threat anymore. The real threat lay in the 2 new gods that had materialized out of nowhere. One was a demonic black creature with twin horns and a massive scythe. The other, having just appeared yesterday, was a trio of undead knights mounted on skeletal war horses. From my observations, these 3 creatures weren't summoned by Egbert. First, after approaching Wessex's forces, they didn't retreat but launched an indiscriminate attack. These monsters hate all humans and don't treat them as equals. Even if these terrifying creatures were truly controlled by Egbert, he wouldn't have just controlled Wessex. He would have long since unified the 7 kingdoms of England and might even be able to challenge the mighty France. Therefore, these creatures were most likely summoned by another force. And that force is most likely the Illuminati. Duke Mocklash and Duke Phoenix, accompanying Loki, had both been to Asgard before. They had witnessed the lizardman Sullivan transform into a giant of light and therefore understood the power of these creatures. Even more terrifying, these lizardmen weren't just a few, but a vast swarm. Loki blew up the Leviathan, destroyed the obsidian pyramid, and then seized the Asgard portal from the O'Sullivan family. The lizardmen were no brainless beasts. With all their grudges piled up, there were few opponents on Earth more formidable than Loki. And Loki knew that, facing multiple punishments, the Illuminati would be more than willing to pulverize him. Having survived and evolved on Earth for 200 million years, even taming an old one as a survival arc, it was impossible for the Illuminati to lack a few hidden talents. It was no surprise that they could find a few remaining Outer Gods thugs. However, their appearance in the kingdom of Wessex at this moment did disrupt his plans. Loki was surrounded by the 3 gods and the Wessex army. As this map shows, we're surrounded by two layers. The first is the thick fog, with the three gods roaming within it. The second is the outer reaches of Stonehelm Fortress, with its nearly 100,000 Wessex troops, trapped within the fortress. Loki didn't sit idly by and wait for death, he constantly attempted to break out. However, the Kingdom of Wessex, having recovered from its initial panic, immediately erupted into an even tighter siege. Using his superior negotiating skills, partly through intimidation and partly through coercion, Egbert persuaded East Anglia and the Saxons to send reinforcements. Furthermore, Egbert emptied the imperial treasury to urgently purchase 300 rapid-fire crossbows from Tang merchants. Unlike traditional bows and arrows, which fired upwards and used gravitational potential energy to generate kinetic energy, these rapid-fire crossbows, developed by the Mahas school, fired horizontally, like later guns. They could load 12 arrows at a time. Each arrow was 2 meters long and weighed 30 kilograms, and could be fired in as little as a minute. Each one was capable of piercing the armor of a giant dragon at a distance of 300 meters. This weapon, developed by the lords to combat the swordsmen of the opposing faction during the Inlushan rebellion 50 years prior, following the chaos and civil war that descended upon the Tang dynasty, represented the most advanced mechanical technology of its time. Sword cultivators can fly at breakneck speeds while aloft, using flying swords. In this situation, the best way to eliminate them is with this ranged attack, which creates a barrage of fire. Thanks to the advent of the rapid-fire crossbow, the Mahas school's workshops were producing 50 per day, urgently equipping all Tang armies. The Tang began crushing the Zoroastrian Fire Knights and Moa Knights, allowing them to survive the devastating catastrophe. You get what you pay for. The weapons urgently dispatched from France and the Visigoths proved to be effective. As Loki led the Vikings toward the Wessex lines, they were met with a hail of steel swords. Even the rock-hard mountain giants were unable to withstand the onslaught. In just one round of sword rain, nearly 10 giants fell before the Wessex lines. Chapter 310 The Strength of the Illuminati, 2. In a war, as long as a nation is strong and doesn't act drastically, it will inevitably be defeated. Of course, with the exception of France in 1940. Besieged by Mercian craftsmen in Fortress Watch, Loki had witnessed the power of the 7 nations of the English Isles. Facing Wessex, a nation far richer than Mercia, Loki had prepared himself mentally and knew the battle he faced would be difficult. But sitting back and waiting for death was never his style. After 10 days of observation, Loki was almost certain that Egbert had reached some sort of agreement with the Illuminati. Upon learning that the monsters would attack humans, Egbert's army didn't withdraw from the battlefield, but instead retreated to a more subtle level. If the Illuminati could help eliminate Loki, this troublesome figure, he would naturally support it. In recent days, the Wessex army and the Illuminati had been inactive. Even the fog-summoning giant octopus had retreated after losing a significant number of its troops. Although the mist continued to spread, the 3 gods merely wandered outside the city and didn't attack. Loki saw this as a sign of weakness. Therefore, he decided to take the initiative. Hey, brothers, here's what I think. I think these stupid creatures are just scary to look at. Forget about anything else. As for that fog-summoning thing, it can only run away, but its offensive capabilities aren't much better than ours. So, tonight, if that wretch is still hanging around outside our gate, let's go out and take him down. Duke Mocklash, despite having lost an arm in the battle a few days ago, smiled. Meanwhile, Duke Phoenix also beamed. Any kill brought joy to the Vikings, especially hunting gods. A thrilling slaughter dedicated to the gods of Valhalla, and even extra rewards awaited. The ingredients required to create high-sequence potions were incredibly complex, and even months of hunting in Asgard might not even elevate a single level. Therefore, no one would refuse a gift from the gods. Hearing that Loki intended to organize a group to slay the gods piqued everyone's interest. As for Loki himself, his intentions were not entirely unfounded. The entire Western continent, with a population of tens of millions, had been practically taken over by the holy bishops. If these seemingly terrifying gods simply bullied the holy bishops on a daily basis, then their attempt to use the same tactics against the Vikings would be a complete failure. Mortals should not look directly at gods is a millennia-old maxim passed down across this continent. But this old adage didn't apply to Loki. Putting aside the countless times those so-called gods had died on television in his previous life, even in this one, after countless battles with Leviathan, armored giants, and lizardmen, He discovered that there wasn't much difference between the outer gods, the great old ones, and mortals. As long as they were strong enough, they would bleed to death if wounded. The seemingly gigantic Leviathan was living proof of this. This thing has already struck fear into our hearts. Plus, this giant octopus can vanish into the thick fog at any moment, making it incredibly difficult to kill. Our target is these three undead riders on strange horses. These three creatures appeared outside Stonehelm Fortress about 2 days ago. Loki could tell they were, like the white monster that summoned the fog, demons, for one reason: their enormous size. The horses they rode on were nearly 2 meters tall, and the three undead, seemingly composed entirely of bones, were around 3 meters tall. A small skirmish had occurred with over 20 Vikings, but because only 3 of them were chosen, 5 of them had died. Tonight was the time to avenge them. At midnight, Loki led 200 fiercely motivated Viking warriors out from the city walls. These 200 were the elite of the elite, almost all of them having participated in the adventure of reclaiming Asgard. They personally entered the 7 divine realms of Asgard and engaged in battle with most of the monsters in the Outlands. Within the divine realms, the purpose of hunting monsters was to harvest their bodies for ingredients to craft potions. Therefore, fear of the gods was non-existent for these bloodthirsty hunters. Across the 7 divine realms, they had personally slain a vast variety of gods, employing a variety of tactics. But through thorough research, these hunters managed to survive and, through the consumption of potions, gained even greater power. Their current target was the 3 mounted skeletons. They stood motionless under the moonlight, like frozen statues. When the Vikings attacked, they formed no particular formation, the lord in front, the soldiers behind. Everyone ran. Only those with the swiftest legs could enjoy the thrill of slaughter by swinging their axes. Those who fell behind could only wait for their comrades to be killed before they could fill their shoes. Faced with these 3 fresh gods, everyone wanted to chop them down. Like a swarm of wasps, they roared and charged at the 3 skeleton knights. These inhuman, half-ghost creatures had evidently spotted them. The strange horses let out a teeth-grinding neigh, and then the skeleton knights raised their spears, and 3 transparent souls emerged from their bodies, charging headlong towards the Viking pirates. Huh? Souls? I know this stuff. Whether it was the Guchanking he had seen within his sea of consciousness or the 5-colored Yuanying forged by King Hunran, souls were no stranger to Loki. Through his conversations with Fenghuzi within Leviathan, he knew that key cultivators of the pre-Kin period could only achieve transcendence and enter the realm of Dalojingson by tempering their spirits. And the soul-tempering step was the thunder tribulation that transcended life and death in cultivation. Among Loki's 200 warriors were nearly 20 thundercallers of the Thunder God's path. Though their ranks varied, each possessed the ability to summon thunder. Dark clouds rolled above the sky, and numerous stout bolts of lightning roared down, shattering transparent souls into smoke. But at that moment, a deafening explosion erupted from the Stonehelm fortress behind him. Loki turned and saw a gigantic worm, 100 meters thick, suddenly burst forth from the sky above the distant castle. The worm, emerging from the earth, opened its maw. Facing the faint mist, a nimble, towering figure emerged from its 4-valved mouthparts. Silver moonlight poured down, casting a white silhouette against its hardened muscles. Gazing into the moonlight, Loki could only make out a giant nearly 8 meters tall. This thing, why does it feel so familiar? I think I've seen this thing somewhere before. As more and more giant figures leaped out of the worm's mouthparts, and as one eye after another lit up in the darkness, Loki immediately recalled the horror of being chased by the Cyclops in the Obsidian Pyramid. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 311: The Strength of the Illuminati, 3. After entering Night City beneath the Leviathan's armor, Loki and his companions took advantage of curfew to sneak into the Obsidian Pyramid. Once Lawrence inserted the cross into the center of the 12 Lords, the Obsidian Pyramid activated. The guards within Night City were Cyclopses, approximately 8 meters tall, with a single eye. Given the Illuminati's immense size, coupled with the fact that the Lizardmen had survived and evolved on Earth for 200 million years, Loki doubted they had any hidden talents. However, when the first war with the Illuminati erupted, Loki had to admit he had underestimated the capabilities of these great old ones. His 2 battles with Urs and Sullivan had left him with the illusion that they were nothing special. However, Thinking back on this, surviving on Earth for 200 million years amidst the rampant outer gods and peril, witnessing dozens of cycles of civilization flourishing and fading, was not something that could be achieved simply by sheer resilience and immortality. They've survived dozens of rounds of species extinction, becoming the great old ones, standing firm through countless civilizational shifts. This group must possess unique strengths. If the octopus-like mist callers haven't fully demonstrated their power, the burrowing worms and the cyclops that have just appeared prove unequivocally that the Illuminati's combat capabilities rival those of most nations in this dimension. Loki had no time to consider whether the cyclops that emerged from the worm's maw were the same ones guarding the obsidian pyramid. He had to survive this attack first. He was about to lead his troops back to Helm, but the three skeleton knights displayed their resilience, like gummy bears. Lightning, falling from the sky and shattering several ghost knights, didn't end their assault. This was only the beginning. More and more transparent spirits, wielding spears, began to surge from their bodies. Within minutes, their number reached nearly 100. At this point, Loki finally understood that the three figures, seemingly wielding broken spears and rusted swords, were merely decorative. They were essentially summoners disguised as knights. Their true weapons were the ghostly soldiers they endlessly summoned from their shattered skeletons. These spirits, as transparent as air and shimmering with a faint glow, weren't particularly powerful, but once approached, they seemed to possess some unholy ability to continuously absorb the psychic energy of living humans. After a brief clash, the powerful chosen ones quickly fatigued, yet the skeleton knights continued to summon new spirits. Only then did Loki finally understand that the lizardmen also possessed talented generals. Whether the mist-caller who appeared first or the skeleton knights who followed him, they were merely vanguards, not the main attackers. The mist-caller was responsible for encircling Helm fortress with a thick layer of fog. These three seemingly harmless skeleton knights were bait, meant to lure him out of the city for an attack. Through intelligence gathering, covert observation, and the recent Viking warriors' pursuit of the mist-caller, the Illuminati had long since determined that Loki was an extremely greedy individual. He wouldn't let go of the fat meat that was within his grasp. If he left the fortress, the skeleton knights wouldn't be able to kill him. But the endless stream of summoned ghost soldiers would keep him trapped outside. At this moment, the powerful Cyclops, led by the burrowing worm, would burst into the fortress. All the unprepared Viking warriors would be immediately slaughtered. Meanwhile, within his tent, 20 kilometers from the battlefield, Egbert was equally restless in the dead of night. From within the camp, he gazed at the misty horizon. Even from a distance, the cries of battle and the muffled thunder from the clouds told him that a great battle was surely breaking out within the thick fog. And the source of this war lay with the Tang dynasty's Prince Liu, who stood not far from him. Across the western continent, Egbert couldn't claim to hold much sway, but within the English Isles, he remained the undisputed king of kings. He was currently engaged in a war that hinged on the fate of his kingdom, and therefore, he declined all irrelevant meetings. He could refuse others, but he dared not refuse the plump man in brocade robes standing 3 meters away. There was a single reason: his surname was Li, and he was a Tang dynasty man. Prince Liu was a diplomat assigned to the western continent by the current Tang emperor, Li Shi, known as Emperor Dezhen of Tang. All Tang dynasty trading companies operating in the western continent were to rely on this diplomat to resolve any disputes or conflicts at the national level. It was undeniable that all the countries in the western continent were now dependent on the silk, tea, porcelain, and spices sold by the Tang people. Egbert had long maintained a respectful distance towards this royal relative, offering concessions on pricing and tariffs, and trying to avoid any conflict with this arrogant Tang man. In terms of military force, he didn't need to mobilize a large army. Simply sending a few dozen sword cultivators could easily crush the Crusaders. As for goods, the Tang people's wares were simply irreplaceable. Even French porcelain, which was the closest in craftsmanship to theirs, was unworthy of high honors. Not to mention porcelain and tea, two essentials for the people of the western continent. Despite all his calculations, Egbert had never imagined the Illuminati's reach would extend to the Tang imperial family. Even Prince Liu, whom he couldn't avoid, was a member of the Illuminati. Putting down his telescope, he walked back to the center of the tent without a word. "Your Highness, Egbert, it's clear you can't deal with this Viking lord. Ultimately, we, the Illuminati, must intervene and assist. We will not only help you eliminate the enemy at hand, but we've even coerced the Viking king, who has already crossed the sea, to remain on standby. Let's not thank me for now." After this war is over, the suzerain will conduct a detailed reckoning with you. For a monarch of Egbert's stature, he had long heard of the Illuminati. He had negotiated with a secret society several times, but out of caution and a deep sense of war against them. Egbert had never responded to the Illuminati's request to bring in staff. Yet today, they appeared on Wessex's soil without his permission, without warning, and summoned powerful monsters to attack his enemies. The feeling was as unsettling as a stranger forcing his way into his castle and bearing his own children. If it had been anyone else, Egbert would have ordered Red Queen Iphidus and the Crimson Apostles to slaughter him on the spot. But the man who came was Prince Li Yu of the Tang dynasty. Wessex simply couldn't afford to offend him, let alone kill him. Even if a single hair was lost, the powerful swordsman who cut through people with ease would be enough to make him suffer. He knew the Illuminati, but he knew even better, there's no such thing as a free lunch. If he relied on these strange creatures to win the war, he would likely pay a much greater price later. And could he bear that price? Egbert knew he probably couldn't. Chapter 312, Stanahelm Fortress Attack and Defense, 1. By the time Loki and his men finally escaped the encirclement of the Skeleton Knights and returned to Stanahelm, the interior had been trampled to ruins by the Cyclops. Giant worms emerged from the earth, their petals-shaped maws wide open. These armored giants descended from the sky, destroying half the city in just half an hour. As they made their way to the city center, the houses constructed of brick, wood, and tiles crumbled beneath their feet like mud and sand. Stanahelm's nearly 1-meter-thick stone walls held out for just over 10 minutes before being riddled with holes under the giants' assault. A year earlier, within the Obsidian Pyramid, Loki had only briefly encountered these powerful gods. Upon discovering that a group of giants had opened the Obsidian Pyramid's gates, he, Lawrence, and Emma turned and fled, never looking back. Back then, the Cyclops' method of attack was to hurl short spears nearly 3 meters in length. With their immense force and sharp texture, the spears, after a prolonged flight, could penetrate the hard surface of the Obsidian Pyramid with ease. The destructive power of the Cyclops was simply no match for England's fragile crusaders. Although the worm's mouth only vomited a few dozen Cyclops, the Viking warriors within the city numbered in the thousands. Leaderless and suddenly attacked, the entire fortress was engulfed in flames. The Vikings immediately found themselves in a bitter struggle. Brothers, listen to my final tactical instructions. At the outset, I'll transform into a giant and hold down the guy's hands. Then, the Berserker Pathers and Valkyrie Pathers will launch a second attack, focusing on the giant's ankles and knees, open a few wounds and knock him down from his stance, and half the battle is done. Finally, the Fisher Pathers will use hooks to rip out his eyeballs. Destroy that giant eye in the center of his skull, and he's ready for the slaughter. Remember this, a squad leader from the Leaping Horse Post said sternly to his subordinates in the river valley. They were the second group of hunters to enter the Divine Realm after Loki left Asgard. A dozen men, hunting monsters and collecting materials across the 7 Divine Realms, had forged a tacit understanding after a long period of collaboration. Amidst the ruins of a house ahead, a giant crouched on the ground, stuffing corpses into his mouth. His back was turned towards them. He devoured the bodies of Vikings crushed by the stone wall, a crunching sound echoing from his mouth. This was the squad leader's target. On the count of 321, with a roar, the squad leader, transformed into a sea giant, rushed forward and grasped the Cyclops from behind. The giant transformed by the Chosen of Valhalla was only about 5 meters tall, significantly smaller than the 8-10-meter Cyclops. Even crouching, the Cyclops could only barely grasp the other's neck. The squad leader tensed his muscles and pulled hard. As the sea giant passed, the Sequence 6 Storm Warrior unleashed his divine power, instantly pulling the defenseless Cyclops to the ground. The Berserkers and Valkyries, hiding behind him, immediately charged forward. As they charged, they drew their weapons and attacked the Cyclops' joints. However, the Cyclops' sturdy muscles were far tougher than mortal flesh and blood. In the previous civilization, the giants, like the humans of this one, had also undergone a long evolutionary journey on this planet. Like human joints, theirs were covered in hard bone. Just as everyone rushed forward, hacking away with all their might, a wall not far in front of them collapsed with a crashing sound. Behind it, 2 more Cyclopses, stepping on the rubble, appeared before the squad. The squad leader's deep blue face instantly turned pale. The squad had been fighting non-stop for 2 hours in the ruins of the destroyed city. In those 2 hours, the number of Viking warriors following him had plummeted from 40 to just 20. All the mortals who hadn't drunk the potion perished in the Cyclops encirclement. The squad leader realized that with the Vikings he could only hunt the Cyclops one by one. If two appeared at once, they had to flee. 3. Certain death. Meanwhile, the two Cyclops, emerging from the shattered low wall, had already spotted the presence. The flames of the city's flames illuminated their fine armor, as well as the two slowly raised short spears. The Cyclops hurled spears were even more powerful than a dragon slayer ballista. The Viking warriors tried to dodge, but it was too late. With two crisp, buzzing thuds, the two spiraling short spears pierced the squad leader's head, killing him before he could even utter a cry. The two short spears pinned his body to the ground. The Cyclops, held by him, wasn't even dead yet. Damn it, Odin's people must die in frontal combat. No one in our ranks will die fleeing with their backs turned. I'll hold them back, you guys finish this fallen guy off first. The appearance of the enemy didn't intimidate the hunting party, instead, it unleashed their inner fervor. The members of the team were already close friends, having experienced hunting missions across the 7 divine realms, and had long since become like family. The berserker knew that a warrior must step forward to block the two giants' ranged attacks. Only then would his teammates have the chance to escape. Drawing his great axe, he charged into the flames, toward the nearby giants. As he ran, his entire body shone with flames, the light of the flame berserker's sequence 6, Flame Skullbreaker. Gazing at his approaching figure, the two Cyclops' faces remained frozen, expressionless. They motionlessly drew two short spears from behind them, gently raised them against the flames, and just as they were about to strike, a blood-red axe flew out of the smoke, slicing deeply into the back of the Cyclops' skull. In this critical moment, Loki finally escaped the skeleton knight outside the city and rode to his destination. Chapter 313, Stanahelm Fortress Attack and Defense, 2. Upon returning to the city, Loki immediately sensed the Cyclops' power. It was clear they were conscious beings, their intelligence no less than that of humans. They were aware that they were over 3 times taller than humans. In normal combat, a human wielding a massive axe could only injure their calves and knees at best. Their vital organs, such as their heads and internal organs, were beyond human reach. Therefore, upon emerging from the worm's maw, the Cyclops' first act was to destroy every building in the city. Without the support of buildings, striking their vitals would be nearly impossible for puny humans. Throwing his axe, he cracked a giant skull, then leaped off, taking off like a soaring star. With his Viking blood fully awakened, leaping 8 meters from the spot was no challenge for him. Leaping onto the giant's shoulder, Loki unsheathed his short axe and slashed with all his might. The axe blade pierced the Cyclops' moist eyeball like a tender watermelon. The giant roared and fell to the ground, instantly hacked to pieces by the onrushing berserkers and theologians. Another giant was not spared either. As one of the first companions to accompany Loki into Jotunheim to hunt giants, the satyr was well versed in how to effectively slay these towering monsters. He drew his lasso and hurled it through the air, the soft yet resilient lasso precisely tangling around the giant's neck. His companions behind him tugged, and the immense force caused the giant to lose his balance and fall to the ground with a thud. A bloody hail of swords and axes ensued. "Brothers, when the giants appeared, did you see Allah and his daughter?" Loki roared, after dispatching several giants. "Boss, I saw them. When the castle was destroyed by the giants, Floor of Frost Ridge led over 100 frostmen to rescue them. But now the city is in chaos, and I wonder where they've gone." Loki breathed a sigh of relief when he heard that Allah and his daughter hadn't been crushed to death by the shattered bricks. His greatest fear was that the castle would be crushed by the giants, burying the father and daughter beneath thousands of pounds of rubble. If that happened, not even a Dalojinxon could save them. Just being alive was enough. "This is damn Odin's blessing." "Thank you, brother." While the Vikings around him were reveling in the thrill of slaughtering giants, Loki had no time to waste. The Illuminati could use burrowing worms to carry the Cyclops to suddenly appear within Stanahelm. This bizarre tactic was completely beyond his imagination. Now, he had to find old Allah and his daughter as quickly as possible. If these two perished, even if they won the war, the Vikings' future in the English Isles would be extremely difficult. Meanwhile, in the ruins of the city 2 kilometers away from Loki, the towering Viking frostborn Flore Wallisong was holding a massive hand, tightly sealing Elizabeth's mouth. "My dear daughter, we are not your enemies. If not for yourself, then for your old father, You must keep your mouth shut and not utter a single sound, because those two deadly creatures are still following us." Unlike most Viking warriors, Flor preferred whale hunting to gaining strength and engaging in battle. Whale oil and meat brought lucrative profits to the whale song family. Furthermore, he enjoyed the thrill of hunting with his companions more than killing. Last autumn, Frostridge's capital, Frostrain Keep, along with 3 other castles within the Frostridge province, burned to ashes. As one of the province's 527 survivors, Flor's decision to follow Loki into England was a decision he had no choice but to make. However, precisely because of his dislike of slaughter and his fondness for farming, none of the over 4,000 Viking warriors who survived understood the importance of Ella and his daughter more than he did. When burrowing worms suddenly appeared within the castle, and all the Viking warriors roared, ready to slay the Cyclops and harvest their materials, only Flor led his crew against the current, reaching out to grab the fragile Mercian princess and carrying her behind them. They rushed out before the castle collapsed. Even a second's delay would have buried them all. "Duke Loki calls you a princess. I don't understand why a princess would dress even more shabbily than my daughter, but if you truly are the one the Duke is talking about, I must ensure your safety." Elizabeth, sensing the 2-meter-tall, pale figure held no ill will, though uncomfortable with her mouth tightly covered, refrained from attacking him. They took refuge in the rubble. Around the corner, 3 Cyclops opened their single, crystal-clear eye and gazed upon the ruined city. A shimmering white light emanated from that eye, carefully scanning every rebel within the ruined fortress. They seemed to be searching for something. Behind Captain Flor, the burly first mate, Old Sea Dog, was carrying the elderly Ulysses Ella on his back. Over 70 years old and a veteran of countless battles, Ella wasn't as panicked as Elizabeth. He knew these Viking warriors were risking their lives to protect them. White light swept across the area, and the 3 giants occasionally stopped, using their massive hands to pry apart the rubble, carefully examining the Vikings trapped beneath the stone slabs. Occasionally, when they felt like it, they would reach out and stuff half-dead people into their mouths. Flor knew that it was impossible for a mortal to fight against these terrifying Cyclopses. He silently gestured to retreat, but just as he turned back, the other 3 giants had already kicked through the broken wall in the ruins behind them and appeared before everyone. Chapter 314, The Battle of Stonnehelm Fortress, 3. Following Flor were 12 frost people from his fleet. They made their living by hunting whales. None of them were chosen ones. And now, they were caught between 6 Cyclops, one after another. A rare pacifist among Vikings, Flor had spent his entire life fishing and had rarely seen combat. Unexpectedly, his first battle would be against an ancient monster. The hairs on his body stood on end. But there was nothing he could do. The giants suddenly appeared around the corner, evidently noticing them. Flor could see their single, crystalline eye blink twice before slowly raising their javelins. Flor's eyeballs shrank to the size of a pinpoint. "Everyone, seek cover, get out of the way." Before he could finish his words, he shoved Elizabeth behind the nearby wall. The girl's fragile body slammed into the hard, cold gravel, scraping her cheek painfully. Thump, 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 3 crisp sounds echoed from behind. That was the sound of iron spears piercing stone. Looking back, the pale man who had dragged her from the castle had been pierced by 3 javelins simultaneously. The sturdy spears were hurled with immense force, nearly half their length driven into the ground. The triangular support prevented him from escaping. 6 Cyclopses took steps, a dull thud echoing continuously. Yet, in his final moments, ruptured organs caused copious amounts of blood to gush from his mouth. Even so, he waved at Elizabeth with all his might. "Run, run!" The young woman felt her icy heart suddenly warm. All along the way, she had coldly followed a Viking lord named Loki Sterrig, watching him command his army and personally send tens of thousands of English soldiers to hell. Each of these precious men was the pillar of their families, the indispensable labor force of the kingdom. Yet, this ruthless Viking lord refused to negotiate or offer any unnecessary words. Wherever the Viking army passed, no living, armed man escaped. But the girl never tried to kill him again. Elizabeth didn't know what had happened. Perhaps it was because, even at Sea-Watch, the man had defended her first, even though he was injured? Or perhaps it was because her father had followed him obediently, his eyes flickering with admiration? Or perhaps, seeing the Viking Duke slaughter Wessex's army like pigs, a strange excitement seemed to well up in a hidden corner of her heart. This excitement stemmed from the centuries of Mercia being subjugated by Wessex. It also stemmed from the disdainful expressions of the various rulers in the apple orchard when they mentioned Ulysses Elam, the devout girl, a lifelong believer in the holy light, regarded this shameful excitement as a demon within her. Every night, she would hold the cross in her hands and face the morning star in the east in devout repentance. Perhaps it was this constant repentance that delayed her from continuing her assassination attempt on Loki. Yes, that must be it. In the unseen process, the girl's feelings towards the Vikings gradually shifted from simple hatred to a feeling she couldn't quite pin down. Hatred, undoubtedly, remained. After all, these men had the blood of countless Mercians on their hands. But after being rescued from danger time and again by these mighty men, how could she not feel anything else? The girl dared not ask herself this question. Yet, at that moment, seeing Flor's body pinned to the spear, blood pouring from his mouth, she rushed to him recklessly. Her pristine white dress trailed a white shadow in the firelight. Allah had no time to grab his daughter, so he could only watch helplessly as her frail figure stood before Flor, facing the 6 Cyclops alone. The Cyclops clearly hadn't expected such a target before them. After a moment of slight surprise, Elizabeth raised her hands and once again chanted the complex miracle spell, a long string of obscure characters, not of this world, uttered from her lips. Between her raised white hands, a blazing sun appeared. This was no ethereal flash, but a tangible, incandescent ball of light. Brilliant, like a star. Unleashing her full potential, the Mercian princess once again achieved concentrating light into something. As the Cyclops approached her, reaching out to draw their spears, the star exploded between her hands. A pallor suddenly appeared within the ruined city. In a moment of silence, the pure white light, like white paint eroding canvas, mercilessly devoured everything before them. Light is inherently formless, fragile, and warm. But now, everyone discovered that when this gentle light was compressed and exploded, it could still unleash its devastating power. Flor, not far from the center of the blast, bore the brunt of the impact. He found that whether he opened his eyes or shut them, the pure white before him remained unshakable. This was true even for humans with eyelids, with no facial features on their heads, but the Cyclops, with only a single, massive eye, was even more devastating. A pure, holy white light, symbolizing annihilation, instantly filled the entire city. In the surging holy light that overwhelmed everything, the unsuspecting Cyclops immediately fell into a long period of blindness. This gave the Viking warriors, who had quickly recovered from their dizziness, a hard-earned opportunity to counterattack. Chapter 315, The Battle of Stanahelm Fortress, 4. No matter how powerful an enemy is, it can't exert any power without seeing. In the pitch darkness, Elizabeth's miracle spell simultaneously blinded every Cyclops within 100 miles. These eyelidless creatures were no match for the terrifying white light that flooded across every corner. All the giants became walking targets. As Loki and his elite troops scurried back to the city, the battle between the Vikings and the Cyclops was nearly over. In the eyes of the gods of Valhalla, the Cyclops was clearly a highly valuable deity. Almost all the Vikings who participated in the slaying of the Cyclops gained a boost in strength. When the last one was dragged to the ground and hacked to pieces, Stanahelm Fortress lay in ruins. Aside from the nearly 3-meter thick outer walls, not a single standing house remained within. Hundreds of Viking warriors formed a massive circle around the ruins of the city. In the center of the circle sat a corpse impaled in the ground, and Elizabeth, now nearly exhausted. After channeling all her psychic energy and unleashing a blast of holy light, the young woman could barely stand. Even so, she struggled to use her miracle spell to heal the wounds of Flor, who lay on the short spear. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Flor was long dead, yet the weeping girl still made a final effort. The spear had sunk deep into the ground, pinning his body to the spot. The prolonged bleeding had turned his face a pale, almost grayish-black. Amidst the young woman's sobs, a large hand reached out, grasped her by the waist, and lifted her onto his shoulders. In this Illuminati raid, the unprepared Vikings had suffered over 1,000 casualties. Flor was merely one of those 1,000. The constant death had long since numbed Loki. If I'm not mistaken, the sudden surge of intense holy light that just appeared must have been created by Elizabeth, right? Allah nodded, taking his exhausted daughter from Loki's arms. All the Vikings in my valley owe her a great debt. Without her, we might all have perished tonight. I will repay this favor someday. Stanahelm Fortress was now devoid of even a decent house. Loki could only open the blood-red stone statue and place Allah and his daughter in the sunken city, where they rested for a while with the other English nobles. This battle was far from over. He needed to consider his next steps. Gazing at the ruins of the city, Loki couldn't help but sigh at how lucky he truly was. It was clear that while the Illuminati's reach was vast, their influence in this era was far less formidable than it was in the 21st century, when they could manipulate the world with ease. It was now clear that the close partnership between Egbert, Lord of Wessex, and the Illuminati was not the same as that of the O'Sullivan family. If the two enemy groups had been more closely connected, while the Cyclops attacked the fortress from within, Egbert's army would simultaneously launch an assault from the outside. With both internal and external forces working together, even an additional 5,000 would surely have perished in Stoneham. Egbert and the Illuminati were two separate enemies, a stroke of luck for Loki. His second stroke of luck was Elizabeth Ella's Holy Light Bomb, the Cyclops, with its powerful attack and defense, capable of striking at both close range and distance, had only one weakness: the single eye on its head. When the situation reached its utmost crisis, the Mercian princess's sudden inspiration, blinding all the giants, saved the Vikings from destruction. However, the situation for Loki was far from optimistic. First, the destruction of the city had not only reduced his forces by nearly 1,000, but also buried all the supplies, food, horses, and dragon-slaying ballistae he had stored within the city amidst the rubble of the collapsed buildings. Unearthing these supplies would have been a tremendous undertaking. Even if exquisitely crafted mechanical artifacts like the Dragon-Slayer ballista were excavated, their continued use would be a serious question. Another serious problem was water. Medieval fortresses mostly relied on deep wells for water supply. However, the tunnel worms emerged from the ground precisely where the wells were located. Not to mention that the wells were now completely destroyed. Even if fresh water still emerged from the ground, Loki wouldn't dare allow his men to consume it. For fresh water, they could only abandon the rubble of the city and search for wells dug by the residents themselves. If they couldn't find any, the small amount of fruit stored in a sunken city would be their only source of drinking water for the time being. Of course, these problems could only be described as survival difficulties rather than a threat of annihilation. Loki's greatest concern at this moment was the burrowing worm controlled by the Illuminati. This creature was a stealthy, swiftly moving underground transport. It suddenly appeared within the fortress, nearly wiping Loki's forces off the map with just a few dozen Cyclops. It's easy to imagine the Illuminati's means and resources. They would undoubtedly use this giant insect to launch a second, or even a third, attack. To regain control of the war, this elusive, strange insect must be eliminated. And for the time being, this task could only be accomplished by Loki. Chapter 316, Stoneham Fortress Attack and Defense, 5. 3 hours later. Having fought all night, the Viking warriors pulled the bodies of their comrades from the rubble, piled them together, and set them on fire. Gathered around the towering flames, they sang ancient Viking songs as they watched their former companions rise into the sky in smoke. After Loki's burning of Valhalla, the Vikings who perished in exile had no place to return. He took the opportunity to abolish the arduous and time-consuming Viking custom that the bodies of the deceased must be carried home by their companions. Amidst the rising smoke and dust, flocks of ravens circled the sky, seen as Odin's messengers, guiding the souls to Valhalla. At dawn, after a long night of toil, Loki once again unleashed the bloody stone statue. After a night of fierce fighting, they needed rest. Stoneham was in ruins, even the roof that offered protection from the wind and rain gone. After placing all his men in the sunken city, the ruined city fell silent once more. Loki carried the bloody stone statue on his back. The blood of his Viking ancestors allowed him to withstand long periods of sleepless nights. He couldn't rest yet, for the next wave of attack was likely imminent. Just as soldiers armed with clubs, no matter how many, could never defeat machine guns and tanks, so too did numbers offer no advantage in the conflict between mortals and gods. After careful consideration, Loki left himself alone in the deserted city. He pressed his left ear to the ground, trying to detect the sound of giant insects moving underground. The Illuminati could command powerful outer gods and demons to fight for them. This was not surprising to Loki. Whether it was their first encounter with Old Valder, who devoted his utmost efforts to searching for the sunken city, or Leviathan, who existed in the form of the Ark, or even later, Shalavan and Yurth, who conducted scientific research in Asgard, these ancient creatures possessed the deepest understanding of the gods of this era. It would have seemed strange if they didn't have a few powerful demons at their disposal. But everything has two sides. While Loki narrowly escaped death in his numerous battles with the Illuminati, he also discovered a crucial truth during these encounters: the gods are not invincible. 10,000 years ago, Nu was patching of the sky completely blocked the outer gods' access to the human world. 1,000 years ago, the first emperor even used them as ingredients in alchemy, wiping nearly all of them from the land of Kyushu. And just last year, in desperate straits, Loki conceived the idea of detonating the methane accumulated within Leviathan, utterly annihilating this great old one. Now, facing this burrowing worm, he had a plan for victory. Come on, you've lived for over 200 million years, you've got to evolve some brains. Since you understand attack the enemy when they're least prepared, you naturally also understand it's better to pursue the enemy with your remaining courage than to seek fame by imitating the tyrant. This, in simple terms, means strike while they're weak. The Illuminati attacker must have seen that the Vikings were at their most tired and weak. His attack wouldn't reach far. Loki was certain that the Illuminati leader he was playing against must be a brilliant man. Being a brilliant man meant that both players were playing under the same rules, and there was a high probability they could predict each other's moves. Just 3 minutes later, when a rumble like fine thunder erupted from underground, he knew his guess was correct. The tremors were still faint, indicating the giant worm was still moving beneath the surface. Loki carefully discerned its direction and gently rose. Following the ground's tremors, he knew the giant worm was getting closer to the surface. When the continuous tremors gradually subsided, he knew the giant worm was about to break free. Standing calmly amid the ruins of the city, Loki drew the axe he carried on his back. The earth beneath his feet rose like a hill, the rubble of the shattered buildings collapsing piece by piece. Suddenly, a bottomless black hole appeared beneath his feet. He knew it was the giant worm's mouth. Falling into the black hole, Loki remained unhurried. In that instant, time slowed down like strands of transparent silk, slowing everything around him. After falling into the giant worm's mouth, his eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he could see countless dark figures densely crawling across the worm's intestines. These figures ranged in size, and while he couldn't discern their specific creatures, their sheer number was terrifying. Damn it! My bet was right, and wrong. Loki's strategy was only partially correct. He'd calculated that the Illuminati would once again use burrowing worms to transport troops. But his bet was wrong. He'd overestimated the Illuminati's capabilities. The second wave of monsters they brought in wasn't the elite Cyclops, but a ragtag force attempting to outnumber them. The arrow was on the string, ready to be released. In the darkness, Loki raised his arm and gently slashed the axe blade. Blood spurted out. Within the giant worm's damp abdomen, the blood, in contact with abundant spiritual energy, instantly rose to a rich crimson color. Amidst the crimson mist, a massive hand rapidly solidified from nothingness. Before the burrowing worm could expel the myriad monsters within its abdomen, it suddenly felt its soft intestines rapidly expanding. It wailed in agony, but this couldn't stop a massive hand from thrusting forth from its mouth. Within that enormous crimson hand was a figure. It was none other than Loki. Come out. I know you long to. The burrowing worm's psychic-fueled abdomen provided all the necessary conditions for the blood mist illusion. The blood-red creator's form was breaking through the barriers of time and space, rapidly projecting towards Earth. The soft worm's body grew larger and larger. Finally, like a balloon, it exploded with a bang. Amidst a hail of flying flesh and blood, a towering giant, nearly 100 meters tall and wearing a pointed helmet, half-knelt within the crimson weapon. It opened its eyes, looked at the group of monsters around it that had also fallen to the ground, and let out a low chuckle. The bloody creator, King Raphael, had finally descended upon this land through the blood mist illusion. 200 subscriptions the day before yesterday, 100 yesterday. 300 subscriptions in 2 days equals 10 yuan earned. I'm sure the website has abandoned me. From today on, I'll update 5 times a day to speed up the completion. These are all saved drafts that have been revised many times. The quality is guaranteed. Finally, forget the monthly tickets and rewards. Support the other surviving books. Chapter 317 Killing God 1. The Illuminati had gone to great lengths to confront Loki. Glancing around through the faint crimson mist, Loki could see scores of fallen outer gods and demons. Some were towering giants, others six-clawed reptiles. Among them were even several minotaur-like minotaurs, the same minotaur Loki had seen in Night City. Within the blood mist, they all turned their gazes, fixed on the Scarlet Creator. Held tightly in the grasp of King Raphael, Loki could sense the fury in the ancient god's gaze. Within the blood mist, high in the sky, two eyes, like solitary lamps, stared intently at him. Facing a god, running away is futile. Since he couldn't escape, he had to find a chance to fight. Ever since escaping the Scarlet Creator's control after drinking the golden potion for an entire winter, Loki had been searching for a way to defeat these ancient gods. He knew this day would come eventually, but he hadn't expected it to arrive so soon. Pulling a potion from behind him, he swallowed it whole, not the bottle. Come on, if you want to fight, then fight. Amidst the rubble, the lone Viking lord raised his axe and gazed at the towering giant. This creature may be powerful, but it's not invincible. In the sunken city, pre-Kinkagan practitioners had once slain one unscathed. The difficulty they faced wasn't how to kill the bloody creator, but how to refine it. Suffer enough damage. Outer gods, old gods, great old ones, they too would die. The massive hand reached out for him again, but Loki didn't retreat, but advanced. The blood axe, absorbing the psionic energy within the blood mist illusion, cleanly split his palm. However, the god seemed a creature without blood. The wound appeared, and a tangible blood mist gushed out from the giant's palm like a waterfall. The thin blood mist formed by the burrow worm's explosion instantly turned a dark red, with the center area almost completely pitch black. Yes, that's exactly what it felt like. Within this crimson mist, King Raphael's two luminous eyes and the horned helmet atop his head were the only visible objects in the darkness. Ancient monsters scattered from the tunnel worm's body to the ground rose one after another, also greedily breathing in the hard-earned psychic energy. These monsters were equally enormous, but in front of the nearly 100-meter-tall blood creator, they were no more than creeping reptiles. In the nearly pitch-black blood mist, Loki clenched his blood axe tightly. In the distant sky, he could feel King Raphael's flaming eyes staring at him. Surprisingly, he didn't desperately try to catch him like he had in Sea-Watch Fortress. This stemmed from his immense confidence. By now, a boundless blood-red fog had enveloped the entire city. Within the blood mist illusion, the lineage of the blood creator was practically synonymous with invincibility. These powerful old gods had no need to panic. They had plenty of ways to play with this rat. Hey! In the pitch-black darkness, Loki could hear no sound except King Raphael's deep laughter. Within the blood mist illusion, scattered monsters indiscriminately attacked anyone who approached. As for King Raphael, the 100-meter-tall old god, he didn't even need to fight these monsters. He simply lifted his foot and dropped it, and the monsters exploded like juicy maggots. Come on, the time for the decisive battle has come. With a furious roar, Loki launched a disparate charge at the old god. Within the pitch-black blood mist, he raised his axe high and leaped to his feet. The blood of his Viking ancestors allowed him to leap to the height of the giant's knees. His bloody axe sank into King Raphael's flesh. He struggled to climb, then turned and slashed again. The indestructible bloody axe cleanly severed the giant's knee. Suddenly struck with ultimate power, the giant inevitably fell to one knee. The sudden slope gave Loki another avenue for a charge. He ran with all his might on the flat islet where the giant knelt, leaping to dangle onto his arm. Loki's target was the two blazing eyes atop the giant's skull. For insects to defeat humans, the only vulnerable point they could inflict damage was the soft eyeballs. Loki's strategy followed suit. In the pitch darkness, he could only see King Raphael's eyes, which resembled will-o'-the-wisp flames. He was now perched on the giant's arm, not far from them. In his battle against the bloody creator, his only weapon was the bloody axe, a modified demon-sealing blade. When the giant's hand struck, Loki chopped whenever he could. When it wasn't convenient, he used his ancestor Viking's powerful physique to dodge. The immense strength afforded by his ancestral blood allowed him to effortlessly leap over 10 meters. In a few flashes, he was perched on the giant's shoulder. The head, blazing with blood and smoke, was clearly visible before him. The giant turned, and Loki could see a hint of amusement still in his eyes. Are you laughing? I've severed all 10 of your fingers. Now your palms are nothing but 2 lumps of flesh. I want to see, as a fellow humanoid, what other means of victory you can employ without both hands. Raising his axe, Loki leaped once more. He held it across his body, and like a cannonball piercing the darkness, he struck King Raphael's eyes. But the bloody creator remained unmoved, not even blinking. In mid-air, Loki unsheathed his bloody axe, aiming for the growing eyeball. Just as he was about to plunge into the dark crimson flames, bang! A massive hand suddenly appeared from the pitch-black blood mist. This hand, composed entirely of blazing flames, suddenly grasped Loki's flying form without warning. instantly neutralizing the fatal attack. The massive arm flexed, and Loki saw another familiar figure. It was another blood-colored creator, the Fire Emperor, whose entire body was ablaze with flames. Haha, you are truly a group of remarkably clever creatures. King Rafazel didn't flinch or evade Loki's blows, just as he deliberately sought to injure himself before battle. Only injury could trigger the blood mist. And only with the blood mist's appearance could his two companions, the Fire Emperor and the Shadow Demon, descend simultaneously. After losing 10 fingers, the pitch-black blood mist illusion was completely dark. It's conceivable that another shadow giant, the Shadow Demon, must also be on its way. Humans are like ants before the bloody creator. Yet, even a lion fighting a rabbit must exert all its might. 3 bloody creators descended upon the city simultaneously. Even Loki, with 3 heads and 6 arms, would be no match for these terrifying ancient gods. He knew he had no way out. Forget it, it's just a game. Under the gaze of 2 giants and 4 will-o'-the-wisp flames, he raised his bloody axe and slashed it across his neck. Darkness instantly swallowed him. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 318 Killing God, 2. Opening his eyes again, Loki knew his gamble had paid off. Just as he'd imagined, he reappeared in the petri dish. However, this time, the petri dish was drastically different from before. This was a world in deep ruin. The island, once peacefully standing amidst the blood-red ocean, was now shattered. Waist-deep in the Crimson Sea, he trudged through a shallow beach. The entire island had been engulfed by the surging Crimson Tide. Sure enough, this was likely a side effect of consuming the golden potion, cleansing the Crimson Apostle's blood from his body. But it didn't matter. As long as he could open his eyes after committing suicide, Loki would have completed the first step of his plan. That's right. This was only the first step. Ever since breaking free from the control of the Crimson Creator, he had never imagined he could defeat the 3 terrifying ancient gods on his own. After swallowing the ancient god inner pale forged by a pre-kin key cultivator and entering the blood mist illusion for the first time, he was stunned by the hundreds of miles of corpses of divine beasts and outer gods. The Lion-Camel Ridge described in Journey to the West is a mountain of skulls, a forest of bones, human hair feathered into felt, flesh rotted into dust. The area where Loki descended was akin to a divine version of Lion-Camel Ridge from another world. Each of these dead creatures could crush a mortal. Yet the bloody creator slaughtered them like chickens. To confront an ancient god with immortal strength was a pipe dream. For an entire winter, countless sleepless nights, he pondered how to escape this near-constant nightmare. Finally, after hundreds of deductions, he decided to enter the petri dish. For inside, besides himself, there was another person. The Prekin Key Cultivator, a Dallo Jinxon Realm Master, the swordsman Gu Chanking. He was still hovering above the sea of blood. High in the sky, more than 20 or 30 meters away from Loki. Seeing his presence, Loki let out a long breath. He stripped off his clothes, untied the rope that had been tied around his waist for 6 months, and threw it with all his might. The power of the ancestors was unleashed. Gu Chanking was plucked from the sky. When he first encountered this powerful swordsman, he was a corpse wielding a heavy sword in the sleeping city. After entering the blood mist illusion and awakening a strand of his spirit sealed in the demon sealing blade, the blood creator reshaped his body and placed him in a petri dish, forcing him to breathe the boundless blood mist above the sea of blood day and night, attempting to slowly erode his mind. By then, Gu Chanking's skin had turned red as a boiled shrimp. He patted his cheek, finding him unresponsive. Loki understood that this swordsman, who relied on breathing to absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to maintain his psychic energy, had absorbed too much blood-colored psychic energy. A year later, he had no means of resisting the blood creator's divine power. But now he had entered Asgard. In the other world where the frost giants were imprisoned, he had obtained the golden elixir water of God, crafted by the Aesir, also known as the Old Gods. At this moment, a bottle of magic potion was in his intestines. Before the battle began, Loki had already formulated all his strategies. After several experiences in the petri dish, he knew that weapons like the blood axe and the backpack on his back could not be transported through. The only things that could follow him through time and space and avoid obstacles were his clothes and the food he had swallowed. After spitting out the intact water of God, He forcefully pulled the cork from the bottle. Then, without hesitation, he poured the entire potion into Gu Chanking's stomach. He no longer needed to think. He had no choice. The magical power of the water of God was to wash away the most concentrated genes in an organism while instantly activating the most scarce ones. Frost giants who drank the aqua regia would instantly revert to their ancestral form, becoming the mindless giants that roamed Jotunheim. The lizardmen understood this clearly, and after breaking through the barrier of time and space, they would trade with the frost giants on the outer walls of the castle, exchanging the aqua regia from the other world in an attempt to activate the extremely powerful light giant bloodline within them. By this time, Gu Chanking had been absorbing blood-colored psychic energy day and night in the petri dish for 2 years. According to the scientific theory that the human body replaces cells every 21 days, even at the Dalao Jinxin level, even if it were slow, 2 years would be enough to bring him infinitely close to becoming a chosen one under the Blood Creator. Therefore, Loki deduced that once Gu Chanking drank the potion, the most scarce part of his body, the one most feared by the Blood Creator, the Dalao Jinxin, would be instantly activated. Brother, don't forget those days in the sunken city, when you slaughtered an entire city with the smoothness of chopping melons and vegetables. I don't ask you to unleash your full might, but retaining half of your ability is not too much to ask. As long as we can escape this shabby place, there will be plenty of time for you to continue searching for Qin Shi Huang, who has hidden in some unknown dimension. Seeing that the entire potion had almost been poured into Gu Chanking's mouth, and he still hadn't reacted, Loki couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. You have to remember, when the lizardman Sullivan drank the potion, it took less than 2 seconds for him to transform into a terrifying giant of light, his eyes spitting lightning. In Asgard, after he'd broken his leg and drank the potion, he instantly purged the Crimson Apostle's bloodline and grew a new body. Brother, you must wake up. Poured the last bit of the potion into Gu Chanking's mouth. Loki tightly covered his mouth to prevent him from spitting out the precious potion. I have a feeling they're coming back. If you don't wake up, death will be a luxury for both of us. Amidst the swirling blood mist, Loki watched as a patch of land fell into the sea of mist. Above the petri dish, the only blood-red creator who hadn't yet teleported away, the shadow demon, slowly emerged with its massive head. Loki looked up at the sky, a pair of flaming eyes, and turned back again. At that moment, Gu Chanking, almost completely immersed in the sea of red, forced his eyes open. Amidst the crimson faces, the redness was rapidly fading. Instead, there were the original black eyes, yellow skin and a murderous aura that was as cold as a steel needle piercing the bones. Chapter 319 Killing God 3. A Dream. 1,000 years, I never imagined that I, Gu Chanking, surviving in this world as a wisp of soul, would actually endure the day of rebirth from the ashes. The blood-red color quickly faded from his body, and Gu Chanking finally regained his true appearance. He was a middle-aged man who appeared strong and confident. Floating back up from the sea of blood, he surveyed his surroundings. Then, he looked up at the blood creator above. Haha, this thing again, how boring. The water of God was effective on Gu Chanking. At this point, Loki had accomplished everything he could. As for whether Gu Chanking could defeat the 3 blood creators, he had no other choice but to pray to the heavens. When Gu Chanking was found in the sunken city, he was clutching the demon sealing blade. However, by then, the blade had already been forged into a bloody axe by the blood creator and handed over to Loki. Whenever he teleported from the outside world into the petri dish, he carried no weapons besides the clothes he wore. This was probably because the bloody creator was also aware of the power of the blood axe. Gu Chanking, now without his weapon, had no doubt whether he could be a match for the bloody creator. However, the pre-kin swordsman beside him didn't care. He extended his right hand, as smooth as jade, and as the sea of blood churned, a huge crab shell with red spots emerged from beneath the surface. It was the head of a hermit crab that had been slaughtered by Viking pirates on the frozen coast. Flying to the crab shell, Gu Chanking forcefully broke off a large piece of the hard shell. Then, using his hand as a knife, he quickly shaved the shell into a 3-foot-long triangular fragment. As he clinched the shell fragment, a cold murderous intent invisibly blossomed from his body, as if simply looking at him would pierce the eyes. Suspended in midair, he gazed at the last remaining blood-red creator, the shadow demon, and softly recited, living like a mayfly in the universe, a grain of sands in the vast ocean. I mourn the brevity of my life, yet envy the infinity of the Yangtze River. I wish to soar with the power of a soaring celestial being, embrace the bright moon and live forever. Knowing it cannot be achieved suddenly, I entrust my legacy to the mournful wind. These 4 words perfectly captured the allure of a sword immortal reborn into the world. Turning to gaze at the shadow giant beside him, Gu Changqing touched the simple sword in his hand. I never imagined that after 1,000 years, I would have the opportunity to reshape my body and slay gods once again. With a casual wave of his hand, a pure, dazzling, and powerful sword energy ignited in the air, reaching hundreds of meters high. With a single swing of the sword, the dome shattered. With a crisp crashing sound, thousands of fragments rained down from the sky, and after a single sword shattered the glass, Gu Changqing transformed into a stream of light, hurtling straight towards the shadow demon's head. Above the sky, snow-white sword flashes resembling thunder flashed continuously. The shadow demon was clearly no silent lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Clouds of black mist emanated from his body, evidently proving that this powerful ancient god was putting up a fierce resistance. After a brief glance, Loki turned and surveyed his surroundings. The battle between the gods was too far away for him. Right now, he needed to worry about how to return to Earth from this damned otherworld. After all his men were still imprisoned in the sunken city. And the only way out of that underwater city was through the portal. If he could return, the food in the sunken city would run out in a few months, and everyone would inevitably starve to death. That city, resting peacefully beneath the sea, would inevitably become a grave for everyone. Therefore, he had to find a way back in this almost completely collapsed petri dish. Loki struggled to climb out, half leaping, half swimming. This was his first glimpse of the outside world since entering this alien dimension. He saw a profound darkness. He could tell he was inside a massive building. The entire structure was constructed from a luminescent material similar to obsidian. Even without a light source, this special building material could still reflect a faint, scattered light. Continuing forward, Loki reached the edge of a cliff. This was the corner of the Scarlet Creator's desk. Not far behind him, the petri dish, resembling a sandbox, still glowed a faint crimson glow. Looking down, he was about 50 meters from the ground, which roughly matched his estimation of the Scarlet Creator's height. Using the faint reflections of light from the obsidian walls, he could see a nearly 100-meter-tall portal in the center of the hall, flanked by dozens of silent, crimson stone statues. Each of the blood-red stone statues held a portkey the size of a copper buckle. That's right, the bloody creator is just an ancient god. After all, the ancient gods aren't some ethereal monster, they too are flesh and blood, born from the outer space. To travel through time and space, they also need to pass through a portal. These two creatures must have passed through this portal to reach Stonnehelm Fortress to capture me. If that's true, doesn't that mean I can also teleport back through this portal? Excited, Loki leaped from the 50-meter platform. Feeling the ground beneath his feet, he broke into a desperate run. He didn't even glance back the entire way. Saving Gu Changqing, feeding him the water of God, this wasn't Duke Loki's kind-hearted act, a desire to save his fellow alien trapped in the same cage. Haha, not at all. Everything he did was simply to use him to kill the bloody creator. This powerful pre-kin key cultivator was no friend, much less someone he could rely on. Don't forget. When his body was found in the sleeping city, he'd clenched the demon sealing blade with both hands and thrust it forcefully into Zhuanghezi's chest, buried in the mud and sand. Loki didn't care why these two former teammates had fallen out, or why it had escalated to a life-or-death struggle. But through this action, he clearly understood that Gu Changqing was a dangerous person. Someone with such extreme strength and a dangerous personality simply couldn't be kept around. If he and the bloody creator could both fight to the death in this strange and desolate place, it would undoubtedly be in Loki's best interest. But at this moment, he had no hope of such a possibility. In the empty hall, he ran like a tiny beetle, exerting all his strength towards the massive light gate. As the saying goes, a horse will die if it's only seen from a mountain. The light gate, over 100 meters high, seemed close, but actually approaching it required a considerable distance. As he walked, Loki could see from the corner of his eye that it was a laboratory-like room. And it was clear that he wasn't the only creature within. As he ran, he could see numerous petri dishes encased in glass on both sides of the hall. Most of the creatures within were larger than humans. Humans, being the smallest, were placed on a square table. In an empty corner of the dark hall, Loki even spotted several creatures, no smaller than the blood creator, also trapped within glass. They were surrounded by a sea of blood-red mist. Closer. Right before my eyes, as he approached the portal, Loki didn't rush in immediately. Instead, he deliberately slowed his pace. He leaped onto a nearby blood-red stone statue and, from among the various portal keys, selected a stick-shaped one and grasped it. While also a portal key, it had a similar texture to the blood sacrifice seal found in the human world and the Asgardian portal key, but the size was completely different. The portals Loki had previously found were only palm-sized, but this stone sword, carried on his shoulder, was over 2 meters long. He quietly lurked near the light portal, awaiting the appearance of the bloody creator. He knew the two ancient gods wouldn't remain in human society for long. They would inevitably need to return through the portal, and that would be his chance to burst forth. Otherwise, he would fly headfirst into the arms of the two bloody creators. That would be a true tragedy. Chapter 320 White Cloud Night. The Kingdom of Mercia, one of the 7 kingdoms of England, encompassed 6 provinces. Among these, the most unique was Cloud Province, nestled against the Saltire. This province held many unique characteristics. Firstly, it was the only province within the Kingdom of Mercia that did not produce grain. Unlike the Mercian people, who diligently exploited the fertile land to grow crops for profit, Cloud Province was shrouded in perpetual fog. This unique climate gave rise to a white rose that flourished there. This white was unlike any other color in nature. Rice has a hint of spring water's blue. White clouds have a touch of the sky's blue. Wheat flour has a more or less golden hue, the earth's golden yellow. However, the white cloud night rose, grown in Cloud Province, was so pure and white that it was almost unbearable to touch. The nearly perpetual fog and unique valley climate meant that this unique flower could only grow in a single, 200-meter-wide valley located within Cloud Province. Nights of white clouds were a necessity for the French royal family, the Plantagenets. The Plantagenets served as the family crest. The demand for bouquets at the Grand Palais in Paris was immense. The Plantagenet, France's national flower, was placed in the center, flanked by pure white bouquets as a backdrop. The nearly brittle white nights of white clouds naturally served as a stunning backdrop for the greenery. Every spring, the Plantagenets dispatched nearly 100 Moonites to deliver the bouquets. Roses, freshly cut from their branches at dawn, flew non-stop for 2 hours before appearing in the halls of the Grand Palais before sunrise. Therefore, the Cloud Province was a unique province within the Kingdom of Mercia. Its most valuable land lay in the White Cloud Valley, a mere 2 square kilometers. However, to protect this land from contamination, the French merchant André Jarvin, known as the White Eagle, spent a fortune to lease the entire province. The 2,000 hectares of land outside the White Cloud Valley were dedicated to growing a single crop, black beans. The French believed that black beans absorbed all surrounding colors, making the White Cloud Night in the White Cloud Valley even whiter. Therefore, while Cloud Province was nominally a territory of the Kingdom of Mercia, actual control of the province had always been in French hands. It was precisely because of Cloud Province's connection to France that Ulysses L. was able to bypass Wessex and trade directly with France on the sea. Both sides benefited, and for decades, there was relative peace. The tyrant who controlled Cloud Province was the French merchant André Jarvin, nicknamed White Eagle, partly because his hair had turned completely gray at a young age, and partly because of his hawk-like ferocity in the business world. He negotiated a monopoly on the supply of royal flowers and forcibly leased a province from the King of Mercia. Both tasks required strength, connections, negotiation skills, and substantial capital. Yet, André managed to accomplish this seemingly impossible task. He had rarely encountered major setbacks in his life, except for these few days. He was driven from his own castle by a group of mysterious visitors. "Master, I have never seen such brazen men. They brazenly walked into my castle, drove out all my gardeners and servants, and acted as if they were going to occupy my private territory forever. My lord, is there any law in this world?" André's indignant rant was directed at a highly distinguished individual. The blonde middleman, dressed in a loose-fitting robe and wielding an emerald cane, was the president of the French Merchants' Union. He had traveled all the way from Paris, aboard a moa, to Yun province to appease André, who was by his side. André was a successful businessman. But even with his wealth, the Illuminati simply disdained him. The secret of their existence was kept secret only by the most powerful at the top of the hierarchy. Among them was Diamond Flower Durand, the president of the French Merchants' Union. Durand was surprised by the Illuminati's cautious approach this time. As a peripheral member of this secret society, He knew little about the rumors surrounding this enigmatic guild. However, what little he heard was all about the 12 patriarchs' grandiose operations, such as hunting down outer gods, enslaving demons, and overthrowing the national regime. This time, regarding the expropriation of Yun province, they surprisingly merely expelled André, rather than exterminating all its residents. This was uncharacteristic of their style. France was the trade capital of the Western continent, its undisputed most important commercial center. All goods bound westward from the Tang dynasty, the Arab Empire, and the Byzantine Empire ultimately reached Paris, from where they were distributed to more remote regions like the Visigothic region, England, and Lombardy. Durand was acquainted with two-thirds of the Western continent's major chambers of commerce and business elites. Naturally, he would hear many secrets unknown to others during his tea parties. Let alone a small businessman like André, even a head of state could be killed at will with the Illuminati's methods. They control the entire planet from the shadows, and mortals are nothing more than ants in their eyes. What could have happened that would make these guys so afraid to even fight for territory openly? And yet they still want to keep this noisy small businessman alive? Chapter 321, The Sect Leaders Panic. Gazing out at a valley of pristine white, filled with birdsong and fragrant flowers, even though the sovereign had lived on this planet for millions of years, he couldn't help but marvel at the impact of life on such a desolate planet. In this cycle of life, the sovereign emerged from his slumber and awakened anew. The sovereign had bestowed upon him the title Lord of the Earthsea, the de facto ruler of the Mediterranean region of the Western continent. Due to his outstanding performance in previous civilizations, he was allowed to use his former name once again. Thus was born Mewtwo, Lord of the Earthsea, one of the 12 sovereigns of the Illuminati. Throughout the Western continent, no one knew this planet better than he did. Throughout his 200-million-year lifespan, he had witnessed flaming meteorites raining down from the sky, nearly crumbling the planet. He had witnessed the demise of at least 10 cycles of life and the birth of new ones. Even so, the pristine White Rose Valley before him was a rare sight in his long life. Unfortunately, the sovereign wasn't in the mood to appreciate it. His mood had been dire for the past few days. All of this stemmed from a Viking duke named Loki Starlag 572 kilometers away. The Leviathan, perched near the Arctic Circle, was blown up. While the investigation of the corpse confirmed the fatal wound was caused by a pre-Kinkigan practitioner, all subsequent investigations, whether into Old Ward or Mr. Luo, pointed to a clear target, Loki Starlag, the village chief of Hanshu village. According to the chief's management philosophy for the Illuminati, rebellious elements within the human community should be handled by peripheral members of the Illuminati. There was no need to expose the guild to the spotlight over ordinary individuals. The Illuminati's ability to survive in the shadows for thousands of years hinged on two key principles: maintaining a low profile. Mewtwo had intended to leave the matter to Ivar. However, Ivar didn't bring him Loki's head. Instead, Loki took the initiative and successfully seized the Illuminati's crucial Asgard portal. Mewtwo simply could not tolerate this. Entering Asgard and researching the Aesir's magical potion, the Water of the Gods, was the most important task the chief had entrusted him. Barely any other. Mewtwo himself understood the importance of this mission. Just as bored humans keep kittens and puppies for companionship, the light giants transformed the Leviathans, creating the lizardmen using the dinosaurs that roamed the surface and their own genes. His original intention was to alleviate boredom. He simply cared about his own happiness and never considered the power these two creatures possessed. As pets, their only function was to stay alive. Therefore, the lizardmen and Leviathans possess only one skill: survival. Compared to other gods who had fallen to earth, they lacked sharp fangs and claws, nor did they possess an extremely developed brain. The light giants possessed all of these qualities. They were perfect gods. If the genes original E belonging to the light giants within their thin bloodline could be successfully activated, the lizardmen would be free to roam the various planes, and no creature could stand up to them. The research had barely begun. Sullivan and Gers had died at the hands of Loki. Gods never look upon ants with a straight face. Mewtwo, in his long life, had never considered any human his rival. Loki's appearance stirred within him, for the first time, a deep-seated hatred for a human. This hatred fueled his unleashing of his most powerful forces. The first wave, led by the burrowing worm, included 92 Cyclops. This force could easily crush the entire Visigothic Free City from south to north, let alone a single lord. However, upon entering Stoneham, the 92 Cyclops vanished into thin air, silently and utterly annihilated. Mewtwo had no idea what had happened. But he knew that Loki was still alive. With no other options, he opened a portal and retrieved his most powerful forces. However, the second wave of monsters sent into the city succumbed, even the ancient burrowing worm, a monster with a lifespan of nearly 10,000 years. This sent Mewtwo into a state of panic, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. For any secret society to achieve dominance, the brute force of an army is essential. The Illuminati's unimpeded control of all governments across the continent stems from the demons and outer gods controlled by their 12 lords. Whether it's the holy bishops, the firebenders of the Zoroastrians, or even the saber-toothed mercenaries of the O'Sullivan family, if the burrowing worm suddenly appears, they often don't even need to fight. The Cyclops casually throws a few spears, slaying a few important targets in a show of force. Nobles, lords, and even the monarch immediately comply. After all, no one wants to antagonize someone with such power. The burrowing worm's existence allows them to appear at any time and in any place they wish. Even if they hide deep within the palace, this omnipresent demon can accurately locate them. As a ruler, isn't it better to live a good life? Therefore, for thousands of years, no one dared to disobey the Illuminati. Until today. The burrowing worm is dead. Not only did the burrowing worms die, the Cyclops army died, and 90% of the monsters under his command died. The Leviathan that could have replenished the troops was also dead. The expected crushing defeat did not come, but instead, his entire army was killed. The clan leader knew that he was experiencing a major change that has not been seen in millions of years. As one of the 12 clan leaders, he secretly controlled the entire western continent, and he had never felt so vulnerable as today. This Loki must have extraordinary qualities that ordinary people could not imagine. But this big trouble that appeared before him had to be solved. Looking at the sea of roses that had not been trimmed for half a month, the clan leader noticed from the corner of his eye that a cluster of the most gorgeous roses in the center seemed to be showing signs of decay. Half a month is 14 days. In the blink of an eye, the bugs that were almost wiped out by the gardener have made a comeback. These chapters have used my lifelong writing skills. I hope the next book will be better. Chapter 322 Expert's Inference. Your Majesty, the fog has dissipated. Before dawn, Iphitus had already nudged Egbert awake. Drowsily hearing these words, he didn't even bother putting on his coat, rushing to his bed. Just as the Red Queen had said, the thick fog covering Stonnehelm had lifted. It seems the Illuminati's mission is accomplished. He still remembered the arrogant Prince Li Yu appearing before him 10 days ago, bearing the Illuminati's orders. That arrogant bastard had vowed the Illuminati would help him resolve his current problems. In the days that followed, amidst the thick white fog, he heard terrifying noises that were not human, and a pure, holy light that nearly illuminated the entire night sky. Mortals are powerless against the Illuminati. Everything that happened before him made Egbert's words even more clear. He was grateful that he hadn't been trapped in Stonnehelm that time. But now, gazing out the window at the familiar emerald green fields, that uneasy feeling returned. This feeling made him restless. If Loki truly died at the hands of the Illuminati, according to the threats Prince Li Yu made a few days ago, now would be the Illuminati's turn to collect my reward. These Illuminati, like thugs, unilaterally devised a plan to aid Egbert and then engaged Loki in a bloody battle. It was clear they were going to use force to enter the kingdom of Wessex. Whether it was forcing the port to open or allowing Illuminati members to occupy the Wessex royal palace, they had plenty of offers and could demand exorbitant prices. Yet, at this moment, the white mist dissipated, and the monsters surrounding the castle vanished. The debt collectors hadn't arrived. What was going on? Could the Illuminati be defeated by Loki? This was ridiculous. Egbert rubbed his chin, sinking into his chair in confusion. An hour later, as the sun gradually rose, he hadn't ordered his troops to take any action. The Wessex army remained firmly stationed at a narrow intersection 5 kilometers from the fortress, firing hundreds of rapid-fire crossbows at Stonnehelm. 3 days later, there was still no movement from the distant fortress. Egbert climbed the hill daily to peer through his telescope, but he couldn't even see a single patrolman ascend the ramparts. No smoke, no sound, not a single figure moving. The entire fortress resembled a deserted, empty fortress. This isn't right. What's causing this ominous feeling? The Illuminati's power and wealth were beyond the realm of possibility. No one could truly say how much of the continent's resources they controlled, or how much military power they could mobilize. None of this could be earned through charity. These ruthless creatures would demand 100-fold return for any favors they gave them. With mixed feelings, he ordered 3 Moanites to fly over Stonnehelm for a reconnaissance. The Moanites knew this was a journey destined for certain death. Regardless of which side survived the fortress, Loki had his terrifying thunder callers at his disposal, while the Cyclops spears could bring down even dragons, let alone unarmored flying Moas. Ecbert's proposed low-flying reconnaissance mission was a literal suicide mission. No one was willing to go. Finally, after threats, intimidation, and a bounty of nearly 1,000 gold pounds, 3 knights, deeply in debt, finally agreed to serve as a death squad. However, no one expected that they would return from Stonnehelm's fortress just an hour later. "What did you see?" Egbert asked nervously, approaching. His mind was filled with so many questions that he desperately wanted any information he could get. "Your Majesty, I saw a city that has turned into ruins, and the corpses of gods on the first floor of the city." "Gods? Are you sure that all the dead on the ground are gods?" "Yes, Your Majesty, we are not mistaken. We did not suffer any attacks on this journey. From the sky, we can see that the ground is already in ruins. In the ruins, there are large pieces of corpses of ancient creatures, dried blood, and many cyclops lying on the ground, being eaten by crows." "What about humans? Are all Loki's troops dead?" The 3 knights looked at each other and shook their heads at the same time. "Your Majesty, we saw some human corpses, but not many. The strange thing is that we were flying above the fortress and did not suffer any attacks at all." The interior of Stonnehelm Fortress was unusually quiet, like an empty dead city. Could it be that the Illuminati and Loki's troops perished together? This is unlikely. Loki is just an ordinary Viking pirate. How could he have the strength to perish together with the Illuminati, who possessed powerful monsters? Perhaps this empty city is a trap set by the Illuminati for my men. Yes, this must be the real situation. The Illuminati controls most of the countries in the entire Western continent, but Wessex has never responded to their demands. It is better to control a cat without claws than to raise a tiger with sharp teeth and claws. If they can set an ambush in Stonnehelm Fortress and wait for me to enter the city and eliminate my troops, then I will have no choice but to agree to all their demands. Egbert knew the Illuminati's capabilities, so he never thought that Loki could survive this disaster. Once he deduced that everything is a conspiracy of the Illuminati, he felt as if everything in front of him suddenly became clear. Haha, maybe those Cyclops corpses the Moa Knights saw in the sky were just them feigning death on the ground. Let me enter the city? No way. Gazing at the over 300 rapid-fire crossbows in his own army, Egbert suddenly felt reassured. You know, the only major power not controlled by the Illuminati at this moment is the unwavering Tang dynasty in the eastern continent. If they were powerful enough to crush me, they wouldn't resort to such scheming. The Cyclops would have already been charging straight at us with their short spears. They must be terrified of my 300 rapid-fire crossbows, so they resorted to this empty city tactic. Thinking he had figured out all the logic, Egbert ordered all troops to remain outside the city and continue defending. As for himself, he had even begun to consider whether, if this battle inflicted too much damage on the Illuminati, he could turn the tables on them, demanding compensation or sharing their resources to expand his own shipping routes. During this long wait, he finally saw Loki return from the blood mist illusion, waited for him to once again activate the blood-red stone statue and release his men, who had barely survived the Cyclops attack, from the sunken city. The surviving Vikings celebrated by high-fiving each other after burning their dead. They once again put on a brilliant performance for Odin. Almost everyone's sequence level had been raised. Having witnessed the power of the rapid-fire crossbow, Loki certainly wouldn't let his precious chosen one stand alone against the Wessex army waiting outside the city. And Egbert had seen that this empty city was a trap. As the two exchanged stares, Loki's true ally, galloping towards them, was braving the wind and waves at sea. Chapter 323 The Slavic King on the Sea. Beat the drums fast, beat the gongs slow, stop the gongs and drums and listen to the singing, even all kinds of idle talk are songs. Listen to me sing the 18 touches, reach out and touch the hair on my face, dark clouds fly halfway across the sky. Reach out and touch the front of my head, my forehead is full and charming. Reach out and touch my hairy forehead, spreading outward and widening in the middle. Reach out and touch my eyes, black eyes staring white. Reach out and touch my nose, the heat is coming out. Reach out and touch my mouth, my baby eyes are smiling slightly. Merindin stared speechlessly at the bow of the longboat, and at the Slavic king at the bow, singing obscene songs in a hoarse voice. If she hadn't seen him sitting on the broken wood throne with her own eyes, she wouldn't have connected this crude peasant with the word Slavic king. He sang obscene songs non-stop for 3 days on the long boat. For 3 days, there were almost no duplicates. Born in Constantinople and raised in a prominent family, Merendon had no idea what kind of person could write such a popular, obscene ditty. Her solid literary background allowed her to discern that these songs were all written by the same person, as the rhymes and rhythmic breaks sounded quite similar. Merendon was a princess after all. According to Western continent etiquette, after a king sang several songs in front of her, she would at least politely compliment him on his lyrics or singing skills. But after a long pause, the Viking princess didn't know where to begin. In the end, she could only clap her hands with an awkward smile. "Ah, great Zhenimikov, you are truly a brilliant poet." Whenever they sailed out to sea, as the longboat cut through the waves, Bakumbush always enjoyed singing a tune. After finishing his little erotic song, he turned to look at the Viking princess behind him, her face etched with a stiff smile, and chuckled softly. Hey, little girl, excuse me for laughing. By the way, we've been sailing for so many days, why haven't we reached England yet?" Merendon scratched his hair, his expression speechless again. The Slavs were quintessential land dwellers. Unlike the Vikings, who were born into pirate families, the vast majority of Slavs never ventured into the water. They subsisted by herding and hunting. As for shipbuilding, even the river ferries often sank to the bottom due to leaks. Fishing was out of the question. It was for this reason that, despite outnumbering the Vikings by more than 10 times their number, the Slavs never ventured westward to plunder Scandinavia. Last year's counterattack by Bakumbush and England was also intended to liberate the Slavic slaves of the Viking homeland. The beastly warriors from the Slavic homeland had never before sailed aboard a longship. Their behavior on board was predictably unpredictable. Almost everyone was vomiting violently, clutching a barrel, and the journey was only halfway through. According to the navigator in the sailor section of Valhalla, it would take at least 3 days for them to reach the English islands. When Geralt called Loki for help, the Viking princess immediately grasped the gravity of the situation. She packed her gifts and set sail without delay, her first stop being the lands of the Vikings' mortal enemies, the Slavs. Despite the seemingly deep-seated feud between the Vikings' yearly eastward journeys and the seemingly deep-seated hatred between the two tribes, they also shared a close bond. If the Vikings fell at the hands of the English, Bakumbush would suffer equally. Moreover, he owed Loki his life last autumn. As expected, the negotiations went exceptionally smoothly. After recovering from a serious injury and then spending a winter doing nothing, Bakumbush promptly agreed to Merendon's request. The Viking princess didn't even have time to sign the Treaty of Alliance or discuss the price before Bakumbush personally blew his horn and summoned all his vassals in Murmansk. Bakumbush's excitement stemmed from 2 factors. First, last year, after crushing the head of the gatekeeper with his own hands in the Holy Mountain, despite his near-death experience, Odin had granted him immense divine power. Upon awakening, he became a chosen one of the Thunder Gods pathed in Valhalla. His initial rank was Sequence 2, Lord of Thunder. From then on, he became a dual-system chosen one, possessing the divine power of both the giant bear path of Hakarn Temple and the Thunder God's path of Valhalla. This was a rare feat in the modern human world. Second, he was happy to immediately repay Loki for sparing his life. Bakumbush revered combat, caring little for the outcome of battles, for the sheer joy of the process. He believed that as long as he had engaged a god in a physical battle, even if he ultimately perished, it was a blessing. After crushing the gatekeeper's head with his own hands, Bakumbush realized he, too, was on the brink of death. Every time he went out to kill, he knew he too could be hacked to death. He had no regrets about dying at the hands of a Viking. He could even accept death with a smile at the hands of Loki, the man with whom he had once shared a drink and who had led him to slay the gods. However, when he opened his eyes again, he found himself in his tent in Murmansk. When a leg, beside him, conveyed Loki's desire for an alliance, he nodded non-committally and never mentioned the matter again. Deep down, Bakumbush disliked forming alliances with anyone. His life motto was that everyone deserved a periodic beating. Once allies became enemies, the feeling of being unable to strike when he wanted to was incredibly painful. This was especially true for the young man who had once saved his life. If the alliance ended, and no one invaded the Slavs, where would he find those adorable Vikings to play with? If Vikings didn't invade every year, Would he still have to go to the Avar Khanate and pick a fight with those sheep-smelling nomads? How degrading. The thought of this made Bakambush lose his appetite and sleep. However, unexpectedly, the arrival of Merendin shortly after the beginning of spring perfectly resolved the problem. First, helping Loki allowed him to repay the debt, a debt that had weighed heavily on Bakambush's heart. With the debt repaid, he no longer had to worry about launching wars against someone he disliked. Second, for nearly 6 months throughout the winter, he had gained the power of the Thor's Path, but nowhere to use it. It was like having a new toy but not being able to play with it. I heard that I could now ride on Viking longships for free and slaughter people on English soil. Haha. Is there such a good thing? I've had a grudge against those English people since last year. When they begged me to send troops, they promised me gold and men, but I ended up annihilating 2 provinces, and when the war was over, they didn't even say a word. Those who know Bakambush well know that it's best not to deceive this dangerous man. Last autumn, he could have destroyed the Holy Mountain because of Nibru's pretend to be deceiving. Now, he just wants to rush into Wessex and personally capture that charlatan named Shimas. If I could crush his head with my own hands, this would be a perfect spring. Chapter 324 Bakambush vs. Kent. A day later, the fleet of 200 longships encountered 20 giant ramming ships patrolling the coastline of the Kingdom of Kent. Seeing the massive ramming ships appear on the sea, the fear they once possessed resurfaced in Merendin. Last year, while leading the saber-toothed mercenaries on their expedition, they had encountered a group of these creatures on the sea. The longships were ruthlessly crushed in the naval battle, and all the saber-toothed mercenaries were killed. However, this year, the longships weren't operated by Vikings, but by the Slavic king Bakambush. What should they do? How could these people, who couldn't even handle a ship, possibly defeat the English navy on the sea? In stark contrast to Merendin's concerns, the Slavic king Bakambush leaped into the sea with a roar upon spotting the ramming ships, then clumsily swam towards the 10 ships. Merendin could tell the man couldn't swim at all. After jumping into the water, he simply flapped his limbs with all his might, but surprisingly, his clumsy swimming skills weren't slowing him down. Behind him, another 1,000 Slavic warriors leaped into the sea with cries. Like drowned rats, they swarmed towards the ram. The English on the ram were stunned. They were merely conducting a routine patrol today, and to save weight, they had no fuel in their hulls. They watched helplessly as the Slavs in the sea gulped down seawater as they desperately struggled to reach them. They could only fire back with their bows and crossbows. Merendin breathed a sigh of relief. On the sea, the Viking longships were no match for the rams. The Slavic warriors under Bakambush's command might seem crude and reckless, but they possess undeniably sharp combat instincts. They knew that if the English fleet became the counterattack, they would not accelerate towards the longships. If the ramming ship failed to initiate an attack, they would have already lost. In the turbulent sea, at least a third of the Slavic warriors drowned. Another third perished under the English navy's bows and crossbows. Even so, the remaining third stubbornly climbed aboard their ramming ships. Once engaged in close combat, the English soldiers were no match for the Slavic beastmen, more ferocious than wild beasts. Especially Bakambush, the first to board the ship. Approaching the ramming ship, he transformed into a ball of lightning, shattering the hull. Then, stepping on the shattered longship, he crushed the drowned English soldiers to pieces. In the center of the battlefield, this towering white bear, capable of summoning lightning, was like a god descended from heaven. No one dared approach him. The events unfolding before Merendin felt a profound sense of unreality. He had never imagined that the Slavs, who couldn't even fish and whose entire crew lacked swimming skills, could actually win a naval battle. And their victory was so unconventional, everyone jumped into the water and swam for their lives. This wild and unconventional approach was something the saber-toothed mercenaries would never learn. Perhaps it was precisely because of this that they were able to forge a path to survival in desperate circumstances. Another day passed, and Bakambush's fleet successfully reached shore. Even with the guidance of a sailor from the longship, they still deviated significantly from their original course. However, the Slavs on board were not likely to complain much. After stepping aboard from the icy beaches of Murmansk, they were content as long as they saw land instead of sea. However, upon reaching land, before they could even vomit the food they had finally managed to eat, the regular crusaders defending Kent appeared before the Slavs. As a result, Merendin watched in astonishment as the Slavs, spewing acid, carried out another massacre. Most of the newly disembarked Slavs were still dazed, yet even so, faced with a charging Crusader cavalry in shock formation, they scrambled atop the giant bears and wargs around them, then crushed them with pure, deep-seated fighting instinct. The Slavs had stubbornly survived centuries of Viking raids eastward. The beastly warriors of the Temple of Hakkar were no pushovers. Through centuries of mutual slaughter, Vikings and Slavs were mortal enemies, but as Bakenbush noted, they also grew together. The annual eastward raids were a bloody battle. The weak, unable to survive the brutal fray, were immediately eliminated, while the strong who survived would produce even stronger offspring. Thus, through year after year of relentless military training, the Slavs who survived had become far superior to ordinary English soldiers in terms of combat power. Last autumn, Bakenbush, armed with only 100 men, took to the poker table and, using slave labor, conquered 2 provinces. Meanwhile, the Slavic soldiers who had successfully reached the coast numbered over 5,000. The Crusaders managed only one charge before being instantly routed by the onslaught of giant bears and wolves. Bear and wolf riders then pursued the Crusaders all the way to the gates of Canterbury, the capital of the Kingdom of Kent. Damn it. If this wreck could hold a few mammoths, there's no way I'd let you bastards get into the city. Bakenbush looked at the towering tower, then at the wargs and giant bears beside him, gnawed on the Crusader carcasses on the pipes, and sighed helplessly. This wasn't a complaint, he'd actually tried. On the icy shores of Murmansk, Merendon had watched helplessly as Bakenbush attempted to transport 2 mammoths onto a longship. Each of these furry beasts, armed with 4 massive teeth, weighed over 5 tons. After crushing 2 longships and nearly drowning in the water, the Slavic king was forced to abandon his pursuit. Loki was still surrounded, and the Slavic king had no time to waste in Canterbury. Desperate, he retreated to the moat, urinated in it as the city's defenders watched, and then led his troops on their way. The Crusaders remained outside the city gates until they had left the kingdom. Chapter 325 Bakenbush vs. East Anglia. The Kingdom of Kent was a small nation, centered around its capital, Canterbury, with a population of no more than 100,000 and an area of only 39 square kilometers. Kent primarily focused on religious power. When the Crusaders were crushed by Bakenbush, no one in the kingdom could stop their advance. In just one morning, the Slavic army, mounted on giant bears and wargs, and plundering numerous horses along the way, raced through the uninhabited wilderness. Before dusk, they reached Kent's neighboring kingdom, East Anglia. Among the 7 kingdoms, East Anglia's location was unique. It stood on a plateau, the highest elevation of the 7 kingdoms. Furthermore, East Anglia was surrounded by 3 kingdoms, Kent, Wessex, and East Saxon. This harsh and precarious environment forced East Anglia to develop its own armed forces, and the Moa Knights became the perfect choice. According to the normal marching route, climbing from Kent, at an altitude of around 20 to 50 meters, to East Anglia, at an altitude of nearly 800 meters, would be extremely strenuous. A slight detour, using the road from the neighboring kingdom of East Saxony, would have allowed them to enter Wessex more quickly. However, the straightforward Bakenbush disliked turning on the march. See a tree blocking the road, chop it down. See a river, wade across. See food, eat. See an enemy, kill them. Always follow the first solution that comes to mind. This was Bakenbush's lifelong philosophy. So, when Merendon carefully pointed out a flat official road with a map in hand, the Slavic king, without even glancing at it, immediately scoffed at the cowardly idea. Huh? A turn? No way. I've been walking this mountain road quite comfortably. If I turn now, those English yellow-haired men at the top might think I'm afraid of them. He looked speechlessly at a leg beside him, who helplessly extended his hand. Despite his position as Bakenbush's chief advisor, his advice often fell by the wayside. Last year, for example, Bakenbush looted vast sums of wealth from the provinces of Frost Ridge and Dragon's Breath Plateau. According to common wisdom, these hundreds of thousands of gold coins would have been enough for him to build several castles and expand his territory. But he didn't. The Slavic king still lived in a drafty tent, accustomed to the cold from his childhood wandering the forests among brown bears. Even though his concubines and children shivered with cold and their lips turned purple, he refused to build a castle for himself. Territorial expansion was out of the question. Oleg even suspected that Bakenbush himself didn't realize the true extent of his province, Murmansk. If he happened to be in a good mood that day, he would run aimlessly. He would pick up the dividing marker without hesitation, then carry it on his shoulders, sing a little erotic song, and dance. After the dance, he would go wherever he wanted. Sometimes they inexplicably ceded large tracts of territory to neighboring provinces. Sometimes they would arbitrarily encroach on other people's land. Over time, no one knew the exact boundaries of the provinces. Hundreds of thousands of gold coins piled up in his tent for an entire winter, severely impacting Quackenbush's life. Since they couldn't be eaten, couldn't be played with, and took up a lot of space, with the arrival of spring, he waved his hand and distributed this vast sum to his vassals. As each vassal returned to the castle with 10 carts of gold coins, their eyes lit up with gold. However, Oleg also noticed that the king had been virtually undefeated throughout his military career since seizing the throne. This was likely due to his unpredictable tactics. He was an utterly unpredictable opponent, because often, even he himself didn't know what he was going to do or where he was going. For example, now, as Quackenbush led his army onto the vast plateau of East Anglia, he immediately realized he seemed lost. Towering trees, tens of meters tall, surrounded him from all directions. Everything around him looked the same. Quackenbush crouched under a large tree and scratched his head. After thinking for 3 seconds, he came up with a solution. This solution could be summed up in one word: burn. After the flames were set, the extremely high altitude of East Anglia, coupled with a dry spring monsoon, instantly turned the forest into a sea of fire. The East Anglian and East Saxon coalition forces, which had been lying in wait in the woods to ambush the Slavic army, totaling nearly 10,000 troops, were immediately engulfed in the sea of fire. Damn it, these Slavic bastards didn't even see us. How could they know where we were ambushing? Yeah, we were active at night and hiding during the day, digging traps for nearly 7 days. How could the Slavs set fire to the mountain without even seeing our shadows? What kind of lunatic would burn a tree at the side of it? My lords, the fire is burning in your ass. Is it still important to argue about this? The dry spring monsoon caused the fire to spread at a terrifying speed since it started. 10,000 troops ran non-stop in the burning dense forest, but they could not outrun the speed of the flames and thick smoke. They did not run out of the woods until the last person was engulfed in flames and died. The instigator of all this was humming a little tune and eating skewers, waiting for the flames to clear a way forward for him. The English coalition forces could never imagine that Quackenbush had no idea that there were troops hiding in the woods from beginning to end. He just got lost and wanted to burn all the trees to burn a road. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.